Hi viewers, you're listening the Alpha King's Untold Stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race, and you will enjoy it a lot. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1: The Hollow Ceremony. The rain began 3 hours before dawn, a relentless weeping drizzle that soaked the world and drowned all sound. I sat on the rough-hewn bench by my cottage window, my knees pulled tight to my chest, watching as each droplet carved a crooked path through the grime on the glass. Outside, the packed earth of the Willow Creek settlement had turned into a vast gray mirror, a mirror that reflected only the weeping sky and the deepening gloom of my own future. The air inside my small home clung thick and damp, smelling of wet pine, cold hearth ash, and something else, something bitter and metallic, the sharp, acrid scent of shattered hope. Last night's fire had died completely. I hadn't bothered to rebuild it. The chill seeping into my bones had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the cavernous, empty space where my dreams had once lived. Just hours ago, I had stood in the Great Hall, our pack's proudest structure, a timbered monument that seemed to mock my own insignificance. I had worn my mother's only fine dress for the occasion. It was a soft, faded lavender, its hem carefully mended in a dozen places where time and wear had frayed the fabric. My hair, the pale, colorless blonde of summer hay, had been braided with delicate sprigs of white heather, a kindness from Lyra, the settlement's gentle healer. She had pressed them into my hands at dawn, her warm fingers squeezing mine, her eyes full of a bright, stubborn optimism that I could not share. "The moon works in mysteries, Lyra," she had whispered, her voice a soft melody against the morning quiet. "Her bond does not always go to the loudest or the strongest. Sometimes it finds the quietest heart." But my heart had been a frantic, terrified drum in my chest. I had known, from the moment I stepped across the hall's threshold and felt the weight of the pack's collective gaze slide over me, and then past me, as if I were merely a trick of the light, I had known. I was 23 summers old. In the Willow Creek pack, that made me an elder among unmated females, a quiet puzzle, a disappointment. And my wolf? Gentle was the word my father had used before he was gone. Others were less kind, faint, dim. While the others in my year could shift with a powerful rush of muscle and fur, a glorious explosion of primal energy, my own change was a whisper, a pale silvery shimmer in the moonlight, a creature of mist and suggestion, a ghost wolf. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of ritual chants and swirling incense. Alpha Kale presided, a man carved from oak and granite, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, his eyes the calm, deep gray of a mountain tarn. Beside him stood his beta, Riven, whose expression remained an impassive, watchful mask throughout the proceedings. One by one, the unmated were called forward. One by one, destiny announced itself. The air grew heavy and sweet with the intoxicating scent of recognition, a scent like lightning and wild honey. I watched as Cora, barely 18, met the gaze of a broad-shouldered hunter from the high meadows. A visible spark seemed to leap between them. The world around them dissolved. It was beautiful. It was agonizing. Then, my name, Lyra. It echoed in the sudden, attentive silence. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not malice, it was something far worse, a collective, held breath of pity. My legs, numb and hollow, carried me forward. The sea of my packmates parted, and I saw their faces, eyes deliberately softening, lips pressed into sympathetic lines, glances sliding away to spare us both the shame. I took my place in the center of the sacred circle. The stone floor was cold beneath my bare feet. The flames of the ritual candles danced, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to recoil from me. The heady smoke of sacred sage curled towards the high, dark beams. I stood, and I waited. I closed my eyes and reached inward, toward the dormant, shy presence of my wolf. I reached outward, straining for that magnetic pull, that invisible thread, that knowing. I offered up every silent prayer, every hidden hope I had ever clutched to my chest in the dark of night. Nothing. Only silence, a thick, suffocating, absolute silence. The seconds stretched, became a minute, another. The silence was broken by the shuffle of a foot, the rustle of fabric, a soft cough from the back. A floorboard let out a long, low groan, a sound of profound fatigue, of finality. Alpha Kale's voice, when it finally came, was low and kind, so terribly, devastatingly kind. "The bond is the moon's gift," he said, the words resonating in the hushed hall. "It cannot be summoned by will, nor measured by worth. Sometimes the moon's design remains a mystery to us. We honor its choice." His understanding was the last gentle blow that shattered me completely. I turned and walked back through the path the crowd made, my head held high only by a final fraying thread of pride. I felt their relief as a physical warmth at my back. Relief that it was me, the ghost girl, and not their own daughter, their own sister. I did not stay for the feasting, for the music, for the celebratory howls that would soon ring into the night. I walked out of the great hall, the cool night air slapping my flushed cheeks, the lavender dress suddenly feeling like a ridiculous costume. No one called after me. No one followed. That was last night. Now, in the bleak, rainy twilight of dawn, I sat in the echoing silence of my cottage and faced the vast, empty stretch of my life to come. The pack would provide. I would have a roof, food, a role, perhaps tending the herb gardens forever. But I would exist on the periphery, a living reminder of chance and failure. A sound tore through the melancholy quiet, not the soft approach of a single friend, but the deliberate, squelching march of several pairs of boots through the mud. My heart, that foolish and optimistic traitor, gave a single hard lurch against my ribs, but it was a reflex without hope. Whatever was happening in the settlement this sodden morning, it had nothing to do with me. The footsteps halted, directly outside my door. I rose slowly, my body stiff with cold and sorrow. I smoothed the wrinkled front of my plain gray work dress, a garment that suited my new reality perfectly. I tucked a loose strand of pale hair behind my ear, took a breath that did nothing to steady me, and opened the door. The world outside my cottage vanished. 3 figures stood in the rain, imposing and alien. They wore uniforms of a deep, profound blue, the color of a midnight sky just before a storm. Silver piping edged their collars and cuffs, and on the left side of their chests, embroidered in glittering thread, was a crest I had seen only in the pack's oldest, most dusty chronicles. A fierce, majestic eagle in mid-soar, its talons clasping a slender, sharp crescent moon. Behind them, materializing from the veil of rain like a phantom ship, was a carriage. It was not wood, but seemed carved from obsidian and moonlight. Black lacquer shone like a dark mirror, inlaid with swirling patterns of silver filigree that glowed with a cold inner light. It was drawn by 4 horses, immense, muscular beasts with coats the color of storm clouds, standing so perfectly still they might have been statues. Water streamed from their tack, but they did not flinch. The central figure, a woman with a stern, elegant face and eyes the color of polished flint, inclined her head in a formal nod. The gesture held a respect that was utterly disorienting when directed at me. "Lyra of the Willow Creek Pack," she announced. Her voice was clear, cutting through the drumming rain with the sharpness of a blade. It held an authority that was innate, unquestionable. "We have come for you." My mouth had gone as dry as summer dust. I could barely force sound past my lips. "For me? Why? Where?" "To the Ethelgard Citadel," she stated, each word a measured drop of ice. "By the immediate and personal order of His Majesty, Alpha King Theron Blackwood." The name struck me like a physical blow. Theron Blackwood, the Alpha King. His title was not just a rank, it was a force of nature. He was the supreme ruler of the 5 territories, a being of legendary power and often feared ruthless efficiency. He governed from a mountain fortress of stone and magic, a place spoken of in hushed tones and wild stories. This was beyond impossible. It was a cosmic error. There must be a mistake," I stammered, the words thin and desperate. "You have the wrong person. I am no one of importance. I am just Lyra." "There is no mistake." The captain's gaze never wavered, but in the depths of her flinty eyes I saw a flicker of something, not warmth, but a grave and intense seriousness. "Please, gather what you require. We depart within the hour." A commotion arose behind me. I turned, my movements slow and dreamlike. A crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, drawn from their homes by the impossible spectacle. I saw Alara, her kind face pale with shock, one hand pressed over her heart. I saw Alpha Kale striding forward, his usual calm replaced by a stormy confusion, his alpha aura radiating protectiveness. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he demanded, his voice a low thunder that vibrated in the wet air. He faced the king's guard without fear. "By what authority do you cross into my lands without warning and demand one of my pack?" The captain did not bristle. She simply reached inside her immaculate coat and produced a scroll. With a deliberate motion, she broke the seal, a large, intricate impression in blood-red wax depicting the same eagle and moon. She unfurled the parchment, holding it aloft. "By the authority of the sovereign's seal and the royal summons, the girl is to accompany us, without delay, without debate." Kale's eyes scanned the document, his jaw tightening until I feared the bone would crack. The seal was the highest law in the land. To defy it was to defy the crown itself. He could not refuse. His shoulders slumped just a fraction, and he turned to me. In his gray eyes, the anger faded, replaced by a deep, searching concern. This time, he voiced the question silently. "Do you want to go?" The choice, sudden and terrifying, was mine. I looked past him at the familiar rain-smeared shapes of my world, the cozy smoke from nearby chimneys, the herb garden I had nurtured, the faces of people who had known me since birth, yet never truly seen me. I looked at the ominous, beautiful carriage, a vessel to an unknown fate. What awaited me at the Citadel? A cruel joke? A political pawn's grim destiny? A punishment for a crime I couldn't fathom? But it was a path, a door out of the gray, static existence that had just been confirmed as my forever. The hollow space inside me, still echoing from the silence in the great hall, screamed that any fate was preferable to this numbing certainty of nothing. A strange calm descended over me. My voice, when I found it, did not shake. "I will need 10 minutes," I said. The captain gave a single, sharp nod. 10 minutes. I turned and walked back into my cottage, closing the door softly on the stunned silence of my entire world. For a moment, I simply stood in the center of the room, my heart pounding a wild, frantic rhythm against my ribs. Then, moving with a speed born of sheer adrenaline, I grabbed my worn leather satchel. My hands trembled as I folded my one other serviceable dress, a deep green wool. I snatched my mother's small leather-bound journal from its place on my bedside stool, its pages filled with her delicate script and pressed flowers. I tucked inside the single silver hairpin she had left me, its gem long lost, and the few copper coins I had saved from selling herbs. The actions were automatic, mundane, but my mind was a torrent, a whirlwind of fear and a terrifying, fragile sliver of something that felt dangerously like possibility. It screamed a single silent question over and over, a question that coiled in my gut like a living thing, filled with dread and a spark I dared not name. Why, by the moon and all the stars, why would the Alpha King send for someone like me? The carriage door closed with a soft, definitive thud that severed me from everything I had ever known. The interior was a world of shadow and rich scent, polished leather, beeswax, and something wilder, ancient, like ozone after a lightning strike or the deep, cold breath of a mountain peak. It made the shy creature inside me, my wolf, stir from her sorrowful lethargy for the first time in days. Velvet cushions, the color of a midnight sea, cradled me. The windows were paned with glass so flawless it seemed I could reach straight through into the streaming gray world outside. I had never known such quiet luxury. The finest wagon in Willow Creek had splintery benches and let in the wind. The captain, who had introduced herself as Captain Isolde, sat across from me. Her posture was rigidly perfect, unbowed by the carriage's gentle rocking as we began to move. The other two guards, a grim-faced man named Gareth and a younger woman called Fianna, rode outside, one driving, the other a vigilant rear guard.
Through the water-blurred glass, I watched my home dissolve. The familiar cluster of cottages with their smoking chimneys, the tall sentinel pines, the muddy path to the creek. They bled into the mist and rain until there was only a monochrome wash of forest and hill. A profound, aching loneliness swelled in my chest, but beneath it, a current of terrifying anticipation thrummed. To break the heavy silence, I spoke, my voice too loud in the cushioned space. How long is the journey? Captain Isolde's sharp eyes met mine. 3 days, if the weather holds. We will stop at royal way stations each night. You will be properly accommodated. She paused, her gaze assessing me as if I were a tactical puzzle. You should attempt to rest. The king does not summon individuals for trivial purposes. That was precisely the thought that terrified me. I twisted my hands in my lap, the calluses on my fingers from gardening rough against my skin. Can you tell me anything? Anything at all about why he wants me? My voice cracked on the last word. It is not my place to disclose the king's private intents, she stated, her tone formal. But then she leaned forward, just slightly, and the lamplight caught the silver threads in her uniform. Her expression shifted, became almost thoughtful. I will tell you this, Lyra. In my 18 years of service in the Royal Vanguard, I have never seen His Majesty dispatch a royal carriage with such urgent priority. The orders came not at dawn, but in the blackest hour of last night. We were commanded to ride without rest if necessary, to retrieve you and return without a moment's delay. She let the words hang in the perfumed air. They should have been comfort. Instead, they coiled around my heart like a cold vine, squeezing tight. Alpha Kings did not lose sleep over failed matings in obscure northern territories. They did not send their most elite guards racing through thunderstorms for girls whose wolves were barely substantial enough to cast a shadow. This was not a rescue, it was a retrieval, and the urgency behind it spoke of a purpose I was too small, too ignorant to comprehend. A mistake was a passive thing. This felt active, calculated. I must have looked as stricken as I felt, for Isolde's stern face softened again, a minute cracking of her professional armor. "His Majesty is many things," she said, her voice lower now, almost confidential. "He is unwavering in his duty. He is formidable in matters of law and justice. He can be austere, but he is not capricious, and he is not cruel. Whatever fears your mind is conjuring, the reality is likely both simpler and far more complex." I wanted to believe her, desperately, but the memory of the silent ceremonial circle was a fresh wound. I merely nodded and turned my face back to the window, a silent dismissal. The landscape began to change as we traveled south and east. The dense, close-knit pine forests of my homeland gradually gave way to rolling hills dotted with hardy sheep. Then came cultivated fields, vast geometric patches of earth stitched together by low stone walls, stretching towards horizons I had never seen. We clattered through small, bustling villages where people stopped their work to gape at the black carriage with its silver insignia. Faces flashed by, wide-eyed with awe, wrinkled with curiosity, sometimes pinched with something that looked like fear. They weren't just looking at a royal vehicle, they were looking at me, the hidden passenger for whom it had been sent. I shrank back into the velvet shadows. By nightfall, the relentless rain finally eased to a drizzle. We reached the first way station, a fortified lodge of solid gray stone and timber, standing sentinel at a crossroads. Guards in simpler versions of the royal livery snapped to attention as we approached, saluting Captain Isolde with crisp efficiency. I was led inside, through a hall smelling of wood smoke and stew, and up a narrow staircase to a small, clean chamber on the second floor. It held a real bed, with a thick mattress and sheets that smelt faintly of lavender and sunlight, a luxury that felt almost sinful. A silent servant brought a tray, a bowl of rich venison stew, a hunk of crusty bread still warm from the oven, roasted roots glazed with honey. It was more food and finer than I usually ate in 2 days. I ate mechanically, each bite flavorless on my tongue, my mind churning. This morning I had woken as Lyra the ghost girl, preparing to face a lifetime of gentle obscurity. Now I was dining alone in a king's way station, speeding towards an audience with the most powerful being on the continent. The dissonance was dizzying. Sleep, when it finally came, was a fractured and haunted thing. I tumbled back into the great hall, the candles guttering around me. But this time, when the silence descended, it was not empty. It was a listening silence, a waiting one. And from the impenetrable darkness beyond the candlelight, a voice resonated, not Alpha Kale's gentle baritone, but a deeper, colder sound like stone grinding against stone. It did not speak my name. It uttered a single commanding word that echoed in the dream vault of the hall and in the marrow of my bones. Found. I jerked awake, my heart hammering against my ribs, the word seared in my mind. The room was dark, the way station silent. Outside, an owl called. I lay there, trembling, until the first gray light of a new and uncertain day began to seep around the edges of the shutters. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Sunlight. The second day dawned not with rain, but with a fragile, triumphant sunlight. It poured through the carriage windows, transforming the world from a gray smear into a tapestry of breathtaking detail. The storm had washed everything clean. Emerald fields dotted with wildflowers like spilled paint rolled away to meet a sky of impossible blue. Silver streams carved cheerful paths through mossy valleys, and ancient forests stood tall and dignified, their leaves glittering with captured rain. The beauty was a stark, almost cruel contrast to the turmoil churning within me. Captain Isolde was quieter today, occupied with a leather-bound case of documents, her brow furrowed in concentration as she scanned reports and made neat notations with a silver-tipped pen. The quiet was not peaceful, it was thick with unspoken questions. Seeking an anchor, I pulled my mother's journal from my satchel. The familiar, worn leather was a comfort to my fingers. I opened it not to read, but to breathe in the faint, lingering scent of pressed rosemary and her unique, gentle presence. My mother, Lyra, had been like me, quiet, with a wolf more spirit than substance. But she had been loved. My father, a quiet carpenter, had adored her with a steadfast, unshakable devotion. When the winter fever took her 3 years ago, a part of him had simply gone with her.
He followed her into the quiet within the year, his strong heart just stopping one morning, as if it had decided its work was done. Since then, I had been a ghost in my own life, moving through days that blurred into seasons, cared for by the pack but never truly claimed by it. I existed in the spaces between families, useful but not essential, a reminder of gentle fragility in a world that valued strength. "We are making excellent time," Isolde announced without looking up, her pen pausing. "The roads are firm. We will reach the capital by tomorrow afternoon." Tomorrow. The word was a cold stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. The citadel was no longer a distant myth. It was a destination, mere hours away. What should I expect?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "When I meet him?" Isolde closed her case, giving me her full attention. Her gaze was analytical. "His Majesty will likely receive you in his private solar, not the grand throne room. He conducts true business there. It is less about spectacle, more about substance. He will ask you questions, direct ones. You must answer with absolute honesty. He values truth over pretty words, clarity over flattery." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. "And, Lyra, whatever you do, do not lower your eyes. He considers it a sign of either deceit or weak-mindedness. He hates it." The advice was so contrary to everything I had ever been taught. Deference, submission, a bowed head, these were the currencies of respect in my world. "Why?" I breathed. "Why does he dislike it so?" A ghost of something, not a smile, but a flicker of dry amusement, passed over her stern features. "He once said, and I quote, 'If I wished to converse with the top of someone's skull, I would hold counsel with my own boots.'" She settled back into her seat. "He is not what the ballads and the fear-mongering stories depict, I assure you." The carriage rolled on, the rhythmic clatter of hooves and wheels a monotonous lullaby. We passed a merchant caravan, the wagons laden with colorful bolts of cloth and exotic spices that scented the air even through our closed windows. The merchants bowed deeply as the royal carriage passed. Later, a patrol of border guards from a nearby territory saluted, their eyes wide with curiosity as they tried to peer inside. My thoughts were a snarl of fear in that stubborn, treacherous spark. What could the Alpha King possibly want with me? A political pawn needed connections, and I had none. A hostage needed value, and I was worthless. Unless it was about my failure itself. Was I to be made an example, a public lesson on the consequences of weakness? As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of violet and rose, we arrived at the second way station. This was not a simple lodge, but a small fortified keep, its stone walls ancient and thick. Courtyards were enclosed within, and stable hands scurried to attend to the magnificent horses. Here, the deference shown to Captain Isolde was even more pronounced. I was not given a room, but a suite, a sitting area with a woven rug and a low-burning fire, and a separate bedchamber beyond. Before I could even take it in, 2 quiet, efficient servants entered. They filled a copper tub in the center of the bedchamber with steaming water, scattering handfuls of fragrant salts that turned the water milky and filled the air with the scent of alpine flowers and sage. "Captain Isolde's orders," the woman with kind eyes said softly when I stared in disbelief, "for the journey's fatigue." They laid out a dress for me on the turned-down bed, not the simple green wool from my bag, but a gown of deep forest green velvet. It was simple in cut, but exquisitely made, with subtle silver embroidery at the cuffs and neckline, finer than anything I had ever touched. "I cannot," I protested, my hands fluttering uselessly. "This isn't mine." "You are a guest of the crown," the servant said, gently but firmly, "and you must be presentable for the citadel." The bath was a revelation. The hot water seemed to leach the cold dregs from my very bones. The silky salts left my skin feeling softer than it had since childhood. When I finally emerged and slipped on the green velvet, it felt like wearing a second skin of cool, luxurious moss. I barely recognized the reflection in the polished metal mirror, a pale girl with wide, haunted eyes, framed in unaccustomed richness. That night, sleep dragged me under more quickly, my body succumbing to the exhaustion of relentless travel and emotional turmoil. But the dreams did not release me. This time, I stood not in the great hall, but in a vast circular library. Towers of books reached into shadowy heights, and the air smelled of old parchment and deep, earthy magic. I was not alone. I could feel a presence, immense and focused, just behind me. I could hear the soft, slow sound of breathing that was not my own, and I could see shadows, tall, distorted, powerful shadows, cast against the endless shelves of books. But every time I tried to turn, to see what cast them, my body would not obey. The shadows would stretch, twist, reaching for me, and just before they made contact, I would wrench myself awake, gasping, the phantom scent of old books and winter air still in my nostrils. I lay in the dark, my hand pressed to my racing heart, the unasked questions screaming in my mind. "Found," the dream voice had said. What had been found, and why did the finding of it send the king's carriage in the dead of night? Tomorrow held the answer. The certainty of that was more terrifying than any dream. Chapter 4. The Gilded Cage of Ethelgard. The third day dawned with a clarity so sharp that it felt like the world had been freshly carved from crystal. A cold, brilliant sun hung in a sky of endless pale blue. There was no softness, no forgiving haze. Everything was in stark, breathtaking focus, as if nature itself was preparing me for the unveiling to come. We traveled now on a road that was no humble track, but a grand stone-paved thoroughfare, wide enough for 3 carriages to pass abreast. The traffic multiplied around us, merchant wagons piled high with goods from distant territories, groups of travelers on horseback, pilgrims on foot heading towards the city's famed temples, and all of them, without exception, parted for the black lacquered carriage, their faces turning to watch its passage with a mixture of reverence, fear, and burning curiosity. By midday, Captain Isolde pointed a gloved finger out the window, her expression unreadable. "Behold the seat of the moon." I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat, fogging the cold glass. It rose from the horizon not as a city, but as a mountain range wrought by gods and giants. Ethelgard. The capital was a staggering, layered vision of pale stone and soaring ambition. It sprawled across the foothills and climbed the steep slopes of a central mountain, culminating in a crown of towers and walls that seemed to pierce the very sky. The heart of it all, blazing white in the noon sun, was the citadel itself, a fortress palace of impossible scale, its banners, bearing the eagle and crescent, snapping like whips in the high, thin wind. "Home to the Alpha Kings for 5 centuries, Isolde said, her voice holding a note of solemn pride. Nearly 100,000 souls live within its embrace, wolves from every territory, every bloodline, living under a single law, a single crown. I could not speak. The sight stole my voice, my breath, my very sense of self. My entire settlement could have been lost in a single city district. This was not a place for a girl who talked to plants and whose wolf was a sigh in the dark. This was a realm of power, of history, of ruthless grandeur. As we drew closer, the road became a river of humanity and purpose. The carriage slowed to navigate bustling streets, lined with buildings that reached 3, 4, even 5 stories tall, their timbered faces leaning over the cobbles as if gossiping. Markets exploded with sensory overload. Vibrant silks and woven tapestries fluttered in the breeze. The air thickened with the smells of roasting meats, exotic spices, baking bread, and the sharp tang of hot metal from smithies. I saw goods I could not name, crafted with a skill that seemed magical. And they saw us. Word traveled ahead of our procession like wildfire. Faces appeared at windows. Crowds gathered at street corners, pressing against the city guards who cleared our path. A sea of eyes, curious, calculating, hungry for a glimpse of the mystery inside the king's own carriage. I shrank back from the window, my borrowed velvet dress suddenly feeling like a laughable pretense, a moth's wing in a gale. "Sit up straight," Captain Isolde's voice cut through my panic, sharp as a blade. "You ride in the sovereign's carriage. You will meet their gaze. You will not cower." But I was cowering, inside where it mattered. I did not belong. That was the single immutable truth that no fine dress or royal escort could alter. I was Lyra of the Ghost Wolf, the girl the moon had ignored, being delivered like a package to the foot of a living legend. The massive iron-bound gates of the inner city swang open before us without a command being uttered. We passed beneath a portcullis of wicked-looking spikes into a vast courtyard paved with seamless white stone. The scale was staggering. Servants in the midnight and silver livery moved with silent, efficient purpose. Everywhere I looked, I saw wolves whose very bearing radiated authority, ambition, and a deadly competence that made my skin prickle. The carriage rolled to a final, smooth halt before a grand entrance flanked by columns carved with epic, swirling scenes of legendary battles and coronations. My heart was a wild, frantic bird trying to escape its cage. Isolde descended first, then turned, offering me her hand. It was not a suggestion. I placed my trembling fingers in hers, the cool leather of her glove a stark contrast to my own clammy skin. My feet touched the sacred stones of the citadel, stones worn smooth by centuries of destiny's footsteps. "This way," Isolde said, and her tone had shifted into something even more formal, more ritualistic. "The king awaits." My legs felt boneless, disconnected as I followed her up a sweeping staircase of veined marble, through doors of ancient dark oak banded with silver. Inside, the citadel was a labyrinth of soaring spaces and intimate passages. Tapestries depicting forests and starry skies lined the walls. Sunlight streamed through tall, leaded windows, casting kaleidoscope patterns on floors so polished I could see the blurred, terrified reflection of a ghost girl walking upon them. We climbed more stairs, turned down hushed corridors, past guards who stood so still they might have been part of the architecture. I was utterly, completely lost. The weight of history, of sheer concentrated power pressed down on me, making the air thin and hard to breathe. Finally, Isolde stopped before a door. It was less ornate than others, but somehow more imposing for its simplicity. It was guarded by 2 warriors who were not just guards, they were predators given human form. Their eyes, gold and piercing, tracked our approach, missing nothing. Isolde knocked once, a firm, concise sound. From within, a voice answered.
It was not loud, but it vibrated through the heavy wood, deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. A single word, laced with absolute authority. Enter. Isolde pushed the door open and immediately stepped aside, gesturing for me to cross the threshold alone. I looked at her, my eyes wide with pure, unadulterated plea. Don't make me go in there alone. She met my gaze, and for a fleeting second, the stern captain was gone, replaced with something almost like empathy. She gave the tiniest, most imperceptible nod. Remember, her eyes seemed to say. Truth and eye contact. Then I was stepping forward. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click that echoed like the ceiling of a tomb. The room was not what I had feared. It was not a cavernous hall of cold stone and a distant throne. It was a study, vast but intimate. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling books, the leather bindings worn and loved. A monumental desk of dark wood dominated the center, its surface a controlled chaos of maps, scrolls, and papers weighted with strange, beautiful stones. But my eyes were drawn to the far wall, which was mostly window, a panoramic vista of the entire city cascading down the mountain, bathed in the fierce afternoon light. And standing before that window, silhouetted against the blinding panorama, was the Alpha King. He was taller than I had imagined, his frame lean and powerful like a coiled spring, not the bulky brute of tavern tales. He wore simple, dark trousers and a gray linen shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and traced with faint, silvery scars. His hair was indeed black as a raven's wing, and it was slightly too long, brushing his collar as if he couldn't be bothered with the vanity of frequent trims. Even with his back turned, he dominated the space. He radiated a presence that made the very air feel dense, charged. He was absolute stillness, a predator so sure of his domain he had no need for movement. "Close it," he said, without turning. His voice was that same resonant baritone, but closer it was edged with a weariness that the single word at the door had concealed. I realized he meant the door. My trembling hands pushed it shut, the latch engaged with a sound that seemed to seal my fate. He was silent for a long moment, gazing out at his kingdom. Then he spoke, and his words froze my blood in the veins. 3 days, he said, the words measured and cold. I sent the carriage 3 days ago, the moment the connection settled. He finally turned from the window.
The impact of his full attention was a physical force. His eyes were not the stormy gray I'd heard described. They were a pale, crystalline blue, the color of winter ice under a hard sun. They were eyes that had witnessed centuries of intrigue, war, and deception, eyes that could strip a soul bare to its foundations. His face was all sharp, unforgiving angles, a blade of a nose, a slash of a mouth held in a severe line, a jaw that looked carved from granite. A thin, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a permanent mark of violence survived. He might have been 30 or 300. With his level of power, it was impossible to tell, but the weariness in those ice-blue eyes was ageless. "Tell me, Lyra of Willow Creek," he commanded, his gaze pinning me where I stood. "During your mating ceremony, did you feel anything unusual at all?" The question was so unexpected, so personal and precise, it robbed me of my carefully rehearsed courtesies. "I felt nothing," I whispered, the confession torn from me. "No pull, no recognition, only emptiness." "Emptiness," he repeated, tasting the word. A flicker of something, not emotion but intense calculation, passed behind his eyes. Intriguing. He took a step toward his desk, his movements fluid and utterly silent. "You are younger than the reports suggested." He eyes me from head to toe in one swift, assessing glance. And your wolf, she is smaller, substantially weaker than the average pack wolf. It wasn't a question, but a clinical observation. The shame I thought I'd left in Willow Creek rushed back, hot and acidic. Yes, I managed, forcing myself to hold his piercing gaze as Isolde had instructed. Do you know why I summoned you here? No, Your Majesty. Do not call me that, he said, a flash of irritation crossing his features. Not within these walls. In public, you will observe every protocol, but in this room, my name is Theron. You will use it. The informality felt like a trap, a test designed to make me stumble, but Isolde had said he valued honesty. I do not know why you summoned me, Theron. Something shifted in his expression, the faintest hint of approval? Better. He picked up a piece of parchment, glanced at it, then set it down as if it had told him nothing new. 3 nights passed in the midst of a council session debating the timber rights of the Eastern Marches. I felt something activate, a tether I had long believed did not exist for me, a mating bond. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I grabbed the back of a heavy leather chair to steady myself. His words were rearranging the universe, rewriting the story of my life in a single impossible sentence. That cannot be, I breathed, the world swimming. I felt in that circle. I felt nothing. If we were bonded, I would have known. I would have felt something. You felt emptiness, he countered, his voice relentless. Because I was not there. The bond tried to form, but one half of its equation was 300 miles away, listening to tedious arguments about pine tariffs. He moved around the desk, closer now, and I caught his scent. Not pine and winter wind, as in my dream, but something cleaner, sharper, frost and stone and untouched snow. Distance can occlude a nascent bond if it forms at the precise wrong moment. It is rare, exceedingly so, but not without precedent. He stopped a few feet away, his intense gaze boring into mine. By the time I recognized the sensation and located its source, your ceremony was concluded. Your fate in the eyes of your pack was sealed. The pieces were crashing together, forming a picture that was both miraculous and horrifying. You knew, I whispered, anger cutting through the shock, sharp and sudden. You knew, and you left me there. You let me believe I was broken, while you did, what, had me investigated? His expression did not change, but his eyes acknowledged the truth of my accusation. Yes. The bald, unvarnished honesty of it was a slap. It was worse than a lie. A lie would have been a kindness. This was a brutal political reality. I turned away from him, my vision blurring as I stared unseeing at the endless rows of books. My mind was a maelstrom, trying to reconcile the girl who had wept in the rain with the woman standing in a king's solar, accused of being his destiny. I understand what this must seem like from your perspective, his voice came from behind me, still calm, still infuriatingly reasonable. But I have responsibilities that dwarf the feelings of a single person, no matter who they are. If this bond is genuine, and every piece of intelligence gathered in the last 72 hours confirms it is, then you are about to become the most scrutinized, most targeted, most gossiped about individual in all 5 territories. I needed to know who you were before I brought you into the heart of the storm. And I whirled back to face him, the anger making me bold. What did you learn? Can I survive it? He studied me, his head tilted slightly. I do not know yet, he said, and the admission shocked me into silence. That is what we are going to discover. Chapter 5, The Council of Wolves. A sharp, impatient knock shattered the tension-thick air of the solar. Theron's expression, which had been a mask of focused intensity, shifted instantly to one of profound annoyance. His jaw tightened, the scar through his eyebrow pulling taut. What? He demanded, the single word a growl that vibrated in the quiet room. The The door opened, not to a guard, but to a man I recognized from portraits in our pack's archives, though those had not captured the vibrant, shrewd intelligence in his amber eyes. Silas Thorne, the king's spymaster and closest advisor. His hair was a striking premature silver, cut close to his skull, and he moved with a predator's silent grace. He offered a slight apologetic bow that didn't touch the calculation in his gaze. "Forgive the intrusion, Theron," he countered smoothly, stepping fully into the room and closing the door. "The Council of Five has convened in the Grand Chamber, formally. They are invoking the right of immediate audience." His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, flicked to me, taking in my stance, my expression, my very essence in one swift, assessing glance. "Rumors of your guest have reached them. They have questions, demanding ones." "The council can wait," Theron said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, glacial calm. "My business here is not yet concluded." "The council," Silas countered smoothly, "debating whether your business constitutes a private affair or a matter of state security. If you refuse them now, they will spend the next week constructing their own narrative, one likely involving enchantment, conspiracy, or worse. Is that the ground you wish to fight on?" The silent battle of wills between the two men was palpable, a history of friendship and fierce disagreement crackling in the space between them. Finally, Theron released a breath that was more a suppressed snarl. "How long?"
"An hour? Perhaps less. They are agitated." "Then grant me the hour." Silas gave a curt nod, his eyes returning to me. "You must be Lyra. Welcome to the eye of the hurricane. My apologies for the tumultuous arrival." He turned back to Theron. "I will hold them at bay. For an hour, no more." With a last inscrutable look at me, he withdrew, sealing us in once more. The moment the latch clicked, Theron's attention snapped back to me, the kingly mask reforged, but with new, urgent cracks of impatience around the edges. "Lyra," he said, his voice low and urgent, "what I must tell you now will determine everything that happens in the next hour, the next day, the rest of your life. Sit." He gestured not to the chairs before the desk, but to two worn, comfortable-looking armchairs arranged before a massive stone fireplace, currently cold. I sank into one, my body grateful for the support, my mind reeling. He took the chair opposite, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, the powerful ruler momentarily replaced by a strategist facing a volatile battlefield. "The Council of Five," he began, each word deliberate, "is not a benign advisory board. They are the elected alphas or their designated proxies from the 5 major territories. Their purpose, in theory, is to advise the crown, mediate inter-territory disputes, and provide a check on sovereign power. In practice, they are 5 of the most cunning, ambitious, and territorial wolves on the continent. Their loyalty is to their own lands first, their own power second, and the stability of the realm a distant third." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a surprisingly human gesture of frustration. "When the news spreads that I have not only found a mate, but that the throne may now produce an heir, the entire political landscape of the continent will rupture and reform. Alliances decades in the making will shatter. Every noble family with an unmated daughter has spent years, fortunes, and considerable intrigue positioning for this exact eventuality." He paused, his ice-blue eyes locking onto mine. "And now you arrive, with no political connections, no territorial leverage, no bloodline of legendary warriors. You are, in their eyes, a void, a wild card. If you accept this bond, it makes you queen consort, the second most powerful figure in the realm. It means every one of those meticulously laid plans is now ash." A humorless, sharp twist touched his lips. "So yes, you complicate things, profoundly. You represent not just a new queen, but the annihilation of a dozen political ambitions.
That makes you dangerous to them, and them dangerous to you. The sheer, staggering scale of it pressed down on me, a weight far greater than the simple shame of rejection. Queen, the word was a foreign, monstrous thing. What if I'm not capable of this? The question was a raw whisper. What if I am exactly what they see, a weak girl from nowhere who will only become a liability to you? Then you tell me now, he said, his gaze unwavering, relentless. And at first light, Captain Isolde will return you to Willow Creek. I will sever the bond completely. You will never feel its echo again. You will resume your life, and I will continue to rule alone, as I have for a century. He let the offer hang, a stark, simple escape route. Then he continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming almost intimate in its seriousness. But if you choose to stay, if you accept this bond and all its consequences, then you must understand this. I will protect you with every resource at my command. I will stand between you and any who would seek to use, harm, or diminish you. But Lyra, I cannot protect you from the scrutiny. I cannot shield you from the gossip, the judgment, the 1,000 eyes that will dissect your every word, your every gesture, your very existence. That battle you must fight yourself. Why? The plea burst from me, childlike in its despair. Why must it be so political? Other wolves find their mates and build a life. They don't have councils and schemes and enemies before they've even spoken their vows. Other wolves, he said, his voice suddenly quiet, stripped of all its royal resonance, are not responsible for the lives and peace of 100,000 souls across 5 territories that have warred with each other for longer than recorded history. I did not choose this crown. I was born to it, trained for it, and by the time I was old enough to understand the gilded cage it truly was, too many people depended on the stability I provide to simply walk away. He stood, turning his back to me as he faced the cold fireplace, his silhouette tense. So, I serve, I endure, I make choices that would haunt lesser beings, and until 3 nights ago, I had made my peace with doing all of it alone. I believed the moon had deemed me unfit for the solace of a partner, the balance of a true mate. He turned his head just slightly, his profile sharp against the gray stone. Then I felt you, and the entire foundation of my existence, shifted. I rose on unsteady legs and joined him at the window, looking out once more at the breathtaking, terrifying city. Each twinkling light in the gathering dusk was a life, a story, a wolf whose peace depended on the man beside me, and somehow, impossibly, on me. I need time, I said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. I need to think. You have until the council convenes, he said, glancing at the angle of the sinking sun through the window. Approximately 40 minutes. 40 minutes? I choked. That's not enough time to decide the course of a lifetime? It is all the time there is. And for the first time, I heard a thread of genuine apology woven through his steel. The moment my carriage arrived in Willow Creek, the rumor mill began to grind. By now, every alpha, every informant, every rival knows something of monumental significance has occurred. If I do not address it tonight, the speculation will become its own truth, one far more dangerous than any reality. He turned to face me fully. But my offer stands. The choice is yours, truly. 40 minutes to choose between the familiar despair of Willow Creek and the glorious, lethal unknown of the crown. I thought of my mother's journal, of her quiet courage. She would say that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else was more important. My heart hammered against my ribs. The ghost wolf inside me, usually so faint, stirred with a new, strange insistence. Not fear, anticipation. If I stay, I said slowly, each word a deliberate step off a cliff,
I need a promise from you. Name it." I met his winter blue gaze, forcing every ounce of my will into my voice. "Do not block the bond again. Whatever happens tonight, whatever pressure the council brings, do not shut me out from feeling what is real between us. I can face their lies, their schemes, their contempt, but I cannot face yours. I will not be left in the silence again."
Something in his expression fractured. Just for a heartbeat, the king vanished, and I saw only Theron, a man who had been alone for a very, very long time. The raw vulnerability in his eyes was more shocking than any display of power. "I promise," he vowed, the words a solemn oath. Another knock, softer this time, Silas's voice tense. "Theron, time's up. They are insistent." Theron looked at me, the question clear in his eyes. The hour of choosing was over. I took a breath that felt like my first true breath in 23 years. I thought of the emptiness, of the gray rain, of the pitying looks. Then I thought of the connection that had hummed to life the moment he promised not to sever it, a faint golden thread in the dark void inside me. I nodded. A look of fierce, blazing approval flashed across his features, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. He straightened, and the Alpha King was back, taller, colder, a force of impending reckoning. "Then let us go," he said, his voice ringing with a new, formidable certainty, "and show the Council of Five their new queen." Chapter 6. The Throne Room and the Trial. The walk from the private solar to the grand throne room was a journey through layers of escalating awe and dread. Captain Isolde materialized outside the door to escort us, her expression grimly determined. The corridors we traversed now were no longer intimate passages, but grand arteries of power, wide enough for a score of wolves to walk abreast. The air grew colder, scented with ancient stone and the faint, metallic tang of polished weaponry. Then, the doors. They were not mere doors, they were towering bronze-sheathed monoliths, twice the height of a man, carved with a breathtakingly intricate bas-relief of the first wolves swearing fealty to the first king. As we approached, 4 guards in full ceremonial armor, their faces hidden by helm visors shaped like snarling wolves, struck the butts of their spears against the stone floor in unison. The sound was a thunderous, echoing crack that vibrated through my bones. Slowly, with a groan of immense weight, the doors began to swing inward. The sight that unfolded stole the breath from my lungs. The grand throne room was a canyon carved from white marble and moonstone. It stretched to a distant vaulted ceiling, so high it was lost in shadow, painted with celestial maps of constellations unknown to me. Enormous columns, each thicker than an ancient oak, carved to resemble great trees with wolves peering from their branches. The floor was a mosaic of onyx and mother of pearl, depicting the eagle and crescent moon on a staggering scale. And at the far end, upon a raised platform of 7 black obsidian steps, sat 2 thrones. One, larger, forged of dark silver and studded with deep blue sapphires, was occupied. The other, slightly smaller, elegant and wrought of white gold and moonstones, stood chillingly, conspicuously empty. It was a void that seemed to scream across the vast space. Between us and the dais, arranged in a forbidding semicircle, stood the Council of Five.
I felt their collective gaze like a physical impact. Theron's hand, firm and unyielding, settled at the small of my back, a point of anchor in the storm. He led me forward, our footsteps the only sound in the monumental silence. The distance to the dais felt infinite. We ascended the obsidian steps. Theron did not sit. He turned to face the council, a sentinel before the empty white throne. I stood slightly behind and to his left, desperately trying to keep my spine straight, my chin level, my eyes forward as Isolde had instructed. "Your Majesty," the central figure spoke, a woman, Lady Selene of the Western Wastes. She was older, perhaps 60, but her back was ramrod straight, her hair a dramatic sweep of pure white over one shoulder. Her gown was the color of dried blood, and her eyes were a pale, unsettling violet. "Your Majesty, we thank you for granting this audience. The realm has been alive with concerning whispers regarding your recent unilateral actions." "Lady Selene," Theron's voice filled the cavernous room effortlessly, cool and devoid of warmth. "Enlighten me, which of my actions has sparked such distress within the council?" "The extraction of an unknown female from a minor northern pack, under cover of urgency and with royal guard," stated a man to her right, Lord Boren of the Iron Hills. He was built like the mountains he ruled, broad and solid, with iron-gray hair and a beard braided with clan tokens. His voice was a low rumble. "Your personal affairs," Theron said, descending the steps towards them with a slow, deliberate prowl that made even Boren tense. "Not subject to council approval." "Your personal affairs," Lady Selene shot back, her violet eyes slicing to me, "ceased to be personal the day you took your oath upon the Moonstone. Every breath you take has political consequence, whether you acknowledge it or not." A third counselor, a younger man with sleek dark hair and a cunning fox-like face, stepped in. Lord Evander of the South Reach. "Lady Selene speaks truth, sire. The succession of the throne has been the single greatest source of instability in the realm for generations. If you have moved to address this vacancy," his gaze flicked to the empty white throne with calculated significance, "the council has not only a right, but a solemn duty to understand the circumstances. Who is she?" The silence hung, echoing off the marble. All eyes burned into me. I felt transparent, dissected, found desperately wanting. Theron stopped at the bottom of the dais, placing himself physically between the council and me. His voice dropped, becoming quieter, yet more terrifying, a blade sheathed in silk. "Let me remind you of a distinction enshrined in law for 500 years. The council advises, the crown decides. If that fundamental structure has grown unclear in your minds, I am prepared to provide a vivid reminder." "No one questions your ultimate authority, sire," Lady Selene said quickly, though her tone was nothing but submissive. "We seek only clarity, for the good of the realm. Who is this girl, and why does she merit such unprecedented secretive retrieval?" The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Theron's stillness was absolute. "Her name," he said, each word a chip of ice, "and she is my fated mate." The silence that followed was so complete, so profound, it had a weight of its own. Then Lady Selene let out a short, disbelieving bark of laughter. The sound was shockingly vulgar in the sacred space.
"Preposterous," she declared, her violet eyes flashing. "Preposterous! You have been tested by every eligible female of noble lineage and significant power for the last century. The bonding magic would have sparked at one of the summit gatherings if this creature were truly your match. The distance argument is a convenient fairy tale for peasants."
"Were truly your match. The distance argument is a convenient fairy tale for peasants." "The truth is rarely convenient," Farron replied, unmoved. "The bond formed during her territory's ceremony 3 nights past. I felt its activation. I have verified its authenticity. I am not presenting a theory for your debate. I am stating a fact of existence." "We have every right to question this fact," Lord Boren boomed, taking a heavy step forward. "Bonds can be simulated. Blood magic, psychic suggestion, alchemical tinctures. The histories are rife with attempts to manipulate the mating magic for political gain. For the security of the crown itself, she must be subjected to the Viridian rite. Immediate verification is non-negotiable." I felt the wave of Theron's rage before I saw it, a pressure that made the torches lining the walls gutter and dip. The air grew thin and sharp, but before he could unleash his fury, I moved. I stepped forward, coming to stand beside him, not behind him. The eyes of the council snapped to me, their surprise evident. My voice, when I spoke, did not ring through the hall, but it was clear, carrying in the attentive silence. "Then let the rite be done." Farron's head whipped toward me, a silent command in his eyes to stand down. I held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to the council. "You seek proof. You doubt the word of your king and the testimony of my own spirit? Then provide your test. I will submit to the Viridian rite." I looked directly at Lady Selene, forcing my hands not to clench at my sides. "What must I do to satisfy the council's concerns?" Lady Selene's eyes narrowed, reassessing me with new, keen interest. "The Viridian rite is an ancient practice. It calls upon the moon's own judgment. It requires preparation, specific lunar herbs, a ceremony at the apex of the night, and a blood offering from both parties to invoke the celestial verdict. It is not without discomfort or risk." Blood offering. The word sent a primal chill down my spine, but what was a little more? "I am not concerned with comfort," I said, the steadiness in my own voice surprising me. "I am concerned with truth, as I am sure are you all." Lord Evander, the Foxlight counselor, stepped forward, a thin smile playing on his lips. "Such admirable conviction. I, Lord Evander, will oversee the preparations. The rite requires a full lunar cycle to arrange properly. We must gather the silver bloom at its zenith, prepare the sanctum." "The full cycle is unnecessary," Farron cut in, his voice a whiplash. "The moonstone sanctum is always prepared. The Royal Conservatory holds Silverbloom in stasis for such purposes. The rite will be performed, tonight, at midnight." A ripple of shock went through the council. "Tonight?" Lady Selene sputtered. "The rituals, the purification, can be accomplished in hours, not weeks, if there is a will and the proper authority," Farron finished for her, his tone leaving no room for debate. He looked at each counselor in turn, his gaze a promise of violence. "Understand this. The rite will proceed according to the ancient scripts, witnessed by the full council. But if there is any deviation, any hint of tampering, any harm that comes to her that is not an inherent part of the ritual, I will hold each one of you personally accountable, to the fullest extent of my power. Is my meaning clear?" The threat hung in the air, colder than the marble walls. Lady Selene finally gave a tight, brittle nod. "Crystal, Your Majesty." "Then the council is dismissed. Lord Evander, coordinate with Silas. The rest of you, I suggest you use the remaining hours to reconcile yourselves to the new reality." One by one they bowed and retreated, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. Lady Selene shot a last inscrutable look at the empty white throne before she left. When the great bronze doors boomed shut, leaving us alone in the cavernous room, my knees finally buckled. Farron's arm was instantly around me, holding me upright. That, he said, his voice a low rumble near my ear, was either the bravest or the most reckless thing I have ever witnessed. I leaned into his strength for a moment. Just a moment. They weren't wrong to demand proof, I whispered, my voice trembling now that the performance was over. If our situations were reversed, I would demand nothing less. They are politicians playing a game where lives are tokens, he murmured, guiding me to a small hidden door behind the dais. We emerged into a quiet antechamber. The oppressive grandeur fell away. This ritual, I asked, my courage faltering. The Viridian rite. How dangerous is it truly? The ritual itself. Farron led me to a stone bench, urging me to sit. The magic is old and pure. It is a channel for truth. You will both give blood onto the moonstone. You will speak vows of binding. The moon's energy will either illuminate the bond for all to see, or it will not. He sat beside me, his expression grave. But the true danger is not the ritual, Lyra. It is the aftermath, depending on its verdict. If it verifies the bond, then you become queen consort in the eyes of gods and law by dawn. There will be a formal ceremony, a coronation, and a storm of attention and intrigue that will make today seem placid. Every power in the territories will descend upon this citadel. And if it fails, I could barely voice it. His ice-blue eyes held mine. It will not fail. I know what I feel. But if, by some unseen interference or cosmic jest, it were to fail, it would suggest either profound deception or external sabotage. Either scenario would plunge the realm into chaos. The council would move to curb my power, citing instability. Rival territories would scent blood. He took my hand, his touch startlingly warm. The rite must confirm the truth, for the sake of the realm as much as for us. The enormity of it was a crushing weight. This was no longer about my lonely heart. The peace of a continent now seemed to rest on the validity of a connection I couldn't even feel. You truly believe it? I asked, searching his face. After a century of nothing, you are so certain? For 100 years, he said, his voice dropping to a raw, private register, I felt a silence so complete I believed it was my natural state. No pull, no echo, no hint of a missing half. I governed, I judged, I waged peace, all from within a fortress of solitude. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, a fleeting, shocking tenderness. Then 3 nights ago, in the middle of an argument about timber, it was as if a door I never knew existed inside a room I thought had no other chambers. It was sudden, absolute, undeniable. I knew what it was the instant I felt it.
I knew what it was the instant I felt it. The raw conviction in his words touched the hollow place inside me. I felt only emptiness, I confessed, the old shame rising. I felt unworthy, too small for the moon to even notice. You are not small, he said with a ferocity that made me flinch. You are precisely what you are meant to be. And if your wolf is a spirit where others are flesh, perhaps it is because she was never meant for the brutish battles of territory. Perhaps she was meant for a different kind of war entirely. Before I could process his words, the antechamber door opened. Silas entered carrying a tray with a carafe of water and some bread and fruit. His sharp eyes missed nothing. Our proximity, my pale face, Theron's uncharacteristic posture. I thought you might require sustenance before the festivities tonight, he said dryly, setting the tray down. Also, the palace is abuzz. The rumors have already mutated. Half the staff believes Lyra is a long-lost princess of a forgotten bloodline. The other half is taking bets on which territory sent her as an assassin. I've started a book, if you're interested. Your dedication to morale is touching, Theron said, releasing my hand and leaning back, the kingly mask slipping back into place. Someone must maintain a sense of perspective, Silas replied, his gaze settling on me. And you, Lyra, how do you find the perspective from the eye of the storm? Ask me again, I said, meeting his hawk-like stare, after midnight. A genuine, if grim, smile touched his lips. Fair enough.
He turned to leave, then paused. For what it is worth, I have known this man 80 years. I have seen him break sieges, outmaneuver rebellions, and make decisions that would have shattered a lesser wolf's spirit. I have never seen him act with the unshakable certainty he is displaying now. Whatever this is between you, it is real. I would stake my life on it. His words lingered after he left, a small, solid stone of truth in the quicksand of doubt. Theron and I sat in silence as true night fell outside the high, narrow windows. The choice had been made. The path was set. All that remained was to walk it and face whatever awaited us in the moonlight. Chapter 7. The Moonstone Sanctum. Midnight in the Aethelgard citadel was not a time of rest, but of profound, watchful silence, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. Captain Isolde came for me as the last bell in the 11th hour faded. She did not speak, merely nodded for me to follow. I was dressed once more in white, a simple sleeveless shift of raw linen that fell to my ankles, leaving my arms and feet bare. No jewelry, no pins in my hair, which hung loose and straight down my back. I was to be a blank page for the moon to write upon. Captain Isolde led me not through the grand halls, but down, deep into the heart of the mountain upon which the citadel was built. The air grew cooler, damper, smelling of deep earth and ancient, sleeping stone. The torches here burned not with orange flame, but with a cool, silver phosphorescence that cast long, haunting shadows. We descended a spiraling staircase hewn directly from the bedrock, our footsteps the only sound. At the bottom lay a circular antechamber, and there, waiting, was Theron. He was similarly clad in a plain white tunic and trousers, his feet bare, his powerful arms exposed. He looked less like a king and more like a primal force, a wolf stripped of all artifice. His ice-blue eyes met mine, and through the faint, new thread of our connection, I felt not fear, but a focused, blazing intensity, a determination that matched my own. Without a word, he offered me his hand. I took it. His skin was warm, his grip firm and sure. Together, we turned toward the final door. It was not bronze or oak, but a single immense slab of pure, milky moonstone, glowing with its own soft internal light. As we approached, it swang inward soundlessly. The moonstone sanctum took the last of my breath away. It was a perfect circular cavern, but it felt not like a cave, but like the inside of a geode crafted by celestial hands. The walls, floor, and domed ceiling were all solid, polished moonstone, radiating that same serene, silvery luminescence. In the very center of the room, upon a low dais, sat a pedestal holding a shallow basin, also carved from moonstone. Above it, an oculus in the dome was open to the sky, and a perfect, brilliant beam of pole moonlight speared down, illuminating the basin in a column of pure, liquid silver. The Council of Five stood in a wide circle around the room's perimeter, silhouetted against the glowing walls. They were shadows in the sacred light. Lady Selene, Lord Boren, Lord Evander, and the two others, the ethereal, silent Lady Isolde of the Mistwood, no relation to the captain, and the shrewd, watchful Lord Kieran of the Sunplains. Silas Thorne stood apart, near the door, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The air hummed, not with magic I recognized, but with something older, cleaner, vaster. It made the tiny hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stand erect. My ghost wolf didn't stir. She became preternaturally still, as if in awe. A figure stepped from the shadows, an ancient, stooped wolf with hair white as snow and eyes clouded with cataracts, the keeper of the sanctum. Her voice was a dry rustle, yet it filled the space. "The seekers of truth approach the heart of the moon," she intoned. "Step into the light." Hand in hand, Theron and I walked forward. The moonlight felt physical, a cool bath that tingled against my skin. We stopped on either side of the moonstone basin, our faces illuminated in the stark, silver beam.
"The Veridine rite is a covenant of blood and truth," the keeper whispered, moving forward with surprising grace. She held a small crescent-shaped dagger made of a single piece of opalescent crystal. She offered the dagger to me first. My hand did not shake as I took it. The hilt was cool. I looked across the basin at Theron. He gave a single, slight nod. I pressed the sharp crystalline edge into the palm of my left hand. There was a bright, sharp sting, and a single, perfect bead of crimson welled up, vivid against my pale skin. I held my hand over the basin. My blood fell, a dark ruby droplet into the pool of collected moonlight within. It did not sink or diffuse. It hovered, a jewel suspended in silver. The keeper took the dagger from me, cleaned it on a white cloth, and offered it to Theron. Without hesitation, he mirrored my action, slicing his own palm with a swift, efficient motion. His blood, a darker red, fell into the basin. It descended until it met mine. Where the two drops touched, a tiny, silent spark of silver light flashed.
Where the two drops touched, a tiny, silent spark of silver light flashed. A collective, soft intake of breath came from the watching council. "Now," the keeper breathed, her clouded eyes seeming to see something far beyond the physical room. "Speak the vow of seeking. Speak your truth into the blood and the light." Theron spoke first. His voice, usually so cool and commanding, was low, reverent, filled with a gravity that shook me to my core. "By the blood of my body and the spirit of my wolf, by the light of the eternal moon and the threads of fate she weaves, I stand before this ancient truth. I acknowledge the bond that has called to me from the silence. I claim the mate who stands before me now. I offer my strength as her shield, my loyalty as her anchor, and the vow of my soul to walk beside her from this night until the last star fades." The words were not from any courtly script. They were his, raw, personal, and devastatingly sincere. They echoed in the moonstone chamber, seeming to be absorbed by the very walls. Then it was my turn. I had no prepared words. I had only the hollow in my heart that had ached for belonging, and the fragile new warmth of the thread connecting me to him. I looked into his winter blue eyes, blazing in the moonlight, and I spoke from the deepest, truest part of me. "By the blood of my body and the spirit of my wolf, by the light of the eternal moon and the paths of destiny she lays, I stand before this sacred truth. I acknowledge the bond that found me in my emptiness. I claim the mate who has seen me in the shadows. I offer my courage as his companion, my truth as his mirror, and the promise of my heart to stand with him through all the storms yet to come." As the last word left my lips, the suspended droplets of our blood in the basin began to glow. Not just the spark where they met, but each individual drop pulsed with a soft, golden light. The column of moonlight surrounding us seemed to thicken, to become almost solid. Then it happened. The light in the basin erupted. It was not an explosion, but a silent, radiant blossoming. A geyser of pure, liquid silver and gold shot upward, engulfing our joined hands over the basin. It did not burn. It was cool and thrilling, like diving into a lake of stars. The light spiraled out, following the paths of our arms, tracing the lines of our bodies in crackling, beautiful energy. It raced across the moonstone floor in intricate, glowing patterns, climbing the walls, illuminating the entire sanctum in a brilliance that should have been blinding, but instead allowed me to see everything with supernatural clarity.
I saw every stunned detail on the council's faces, Lady Celine's shock, Lord Boren's awe, Lord Evander's calculating eyes gone wide. I saw Silas, his usual irony replaced by stark wonder. I saw Captain Isolde at the door, her stern face softened in reverence. But most of all, I saw Theron, and I felt him. The bond did not just snap into place, it unfolded. It was like a flower blooming in a frozen desert, like a symphony beginning after a lifetime of silence. The hollow inside me didn't just fill, it overflowed. I was inundated with a torrent of sensation, not just his physical presence, but the landscape of his soul. I felt the immense, weary weight of his centuries of rule. I felt the fierce, protective fury he held toward the council. I felt the lonely, disciplined control he maintained over every aspect of his existence. And beneath it all, a profound, shocked, trembling relief. A relief so deep it bordered on anguish. His eyes were no longer just ice blue. They were glowing with molten silver, reflecting the cosmic light that bound us, and I knew, without a doubt, that my own eyes mirrored his. My wolf did not surge forward with power. She unfurled. She was still a spirit, still pale and insubstantial, but she was radiant, filled with a joyful, singing certainty. She recognized her mate. She had found her home. The light began to recede, flowing back into the basin like a tide, condensing until only our hands, still clasped over the stone, glowed with a gentle, intertwined luminescence of silver and gold. The connection between us remained, a vibrant, living chord of awareness and emotion. I could feel his heartbeat sync with mine. I could feel the warm, solid reality of his spirit beside my own. The silence in the sanctum was now of awe, not doubt. Lord Boren was the first to move. The mountain of a man went down on one knee, his head bowed. "The moon has spoken," he said, his gruff voice thick with emotion. One by one, the others followed. Lady Celine knelt last, her violet eyes wide, all her cynicism stripped away by the witnessed miracle. "Long live the Queen," she whispered, and this time it held no mockery. Theron's hand tightened around mine. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw a true, unguarded smile touch his lips. It transformed his entire face, carving lines of warmth and life into the stern mask. "Breathe, Lyra," he murmured, for my ears alone. His thumbs stroked the back of my hand, where the tiny cut had already sealed, leaving only a faint silver shimmer. I was breathing, but it felt like learning all over again. The world was sharper, clearer, more vibrant. I could feel the cool stone beneath my feet, the hum of the ancient magic in the walls, the complex web of emotions from every person in the room, and I could feel him, a steady, blazing sun in the center of my new universe. The keeper of the sanctum approached, her clouded eyes now seeming to see directly into the glowing connection between us. "The truth is confirmed," she announced to the chamber, "a bond blessed by the moon's own light, a union that will shape the fate of the realm." Theron raised our still-clasped hands, the intertwined light a visible banner. "Rise," he commanded the council, his voice ringing with a new, unchallengeable authority. "Rise and let the word be sent to every corner of every territory. The throne has its consort. The king has found his queen. There will be a formal bonding and coronation in 3 days. All who wish to bear witness may come." 3 days is insufficient for proper preparations, Lady Celine began, rising, her political instincts reasserting themselves.
3 days, Theron repeated, the finality in his tones silencing all protest. 3 days is what you have. Make it suffice. His gaze swept over them. And before the ceremony, I will expect each of your personal oaths of loyalty, not just to the crown, but to your queen, on your lives and your territories.
He didn't wait for their response. Still holding my hand, the soft glow of our bond fading, but the connection thrumming stronger than ever, he led me from the sanctum, past the kneeling council, past a beaming Silas, and a proud Captain Isolde. We did not return to the upper citadel immediately. He led me to a small, hidden balcony that overlooked the sleeping city from a dizzying height. The night air was cold and clean, scented with pine from the distant mountains. Below, Athelgard was a carpet of scattered, warm lights, a constellation held in the palm of the night. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice small against the vastness. "Now," he said, pulling me gently to his side, his arm around my shoulders, "we face 3 days of controlled chaos. The entire political structure of the continent just shifted. Emissaries will arrive, each wanting to scrutinize you, assess your influence, determine how to manipulate or appease you. You will be drilled on protocols, fitted for a dozen gowns, briefed on 500 years of grudges and alliances." He looked down at me, his face etched in moonlight. "It will be exhausting. It will be overwhelming. There will be moments you will question every choice that brought you here." He turned me to face him, his hands warm on my shoulders. "But through all of it, you will have me. You will have Silas, who is infuriating but peerlessly loyal. You will have Isolde, who would now clearly die for you. And you will have this." He placed his hand over my heart, where the bond glowed warmly within. "A connection that tells you, even in the darkest hour, that you are not alone, that your strength is now shared, that your burdens are now divided." I leaned into him, resting my forehead against his chest, listening to the steady, strong rhythm of his heart that now felt like my own second pulse. The fears were still there, the scale of it, the enemies, my own inadequacy, but they were no longer alone in the dark. They were met by his certainty, his strength, his vow. Together, we looked out at the kingdom that was now partly mine to protect, to guide, to love. The path ahead was fraught with peril and politics, but for the first time in my life, I was not walking it alone. I was walking it hand in hand with my mate, under the same moon that had at last claimed us both. Chapter 8. The Weight of the Crown. The 3 days that followed the Viridian Rite were a tempest contained within stone walls, a whirlwind of silks, scrolls, and scrutinizing eyes. The profound, silent truth of the sanctum was immediately buried under an avalanche of practical, political reality. My temporary suite became a command post. Seams wives descended, their fingers flying with measuring tapes and pins, surrounding me with clouds of silk, velvet, and brocade in colors I had no say in choosing. White for the bonding ceremony, midnight blue for the coronation, deep emerald for the first state banquet. Each fitting was an ordeal of standing still while sharp eyes assessed every curve and angle, discussing my presentation as if I were a prize mare. Tutors arrived in shifts, their voices a relentless stream. Master Aldrich, an elderly wolf with a beard like a snowdrift, drilled me on the genealogies of the 5 ruling families, their triumphs, their shames, their interlocking webs of marriage and betrayal. Lady Yvain, sharp and elegant, taught me the silent language of the court, which gesture indicated polite dismissal, which tilt of the head signaled danger, how to navigate a room without ever turning your back on a potential rival. Silas Thorne was my constant shadow during the brief respites, his manner a blend of mentorship and grim amusement. He pointed out faces in the portraits lining the halls. Lord Geralt of the Frostfangs, his daughter was the favorite for queen consort. He will smile to your face and poison your wine if given a chance. Or Lady Lyra of the Mistwood, a distant cousin of yours, technically. She's indifferent to power, but fiercely protective of her forests. Earn her trust, and you gain a quiet but unshakable ally. I learned that my bonding to Theron wasn't just a union, it was a seismic event that rendered decades of political maneuvering obsolete. I saw evidence of the fallout daily. Grim-faced emissaries from distant territories arrived at all hours, demanding audiences. The air in the citadel thickened with a potent mix of excitement, resentment, and naked ambition. Captain Isolde oversaw security with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold. She personally vetted every servant assigned to my wing, doubled the guard on my doors, and instituted a system of food tasters that made every meal feel like a potential execution. "They will test you," she said flatly one afternoon, reviewing a list of invited guests. "Not just with words, with gifts that carry subtle curses, with accidents in crowded halls. Your life is now a battlefield. My duty is to arm you for it." Through it all, I caught glimpses of Theron, but they were fleeting. He was a storm cloud moving through the corridors, trailed by advisors and generals, his expression of one of focused, relentless intensity. Our bond, that vibrant new connection, hummed constantly between us, a chord of warmth and awareness. In moments of particular stress, when the names and titles and protocols blurred into nonsense, I would feel a pulse of steadying calm flow down that chord. No words, just a silent, "I am here, you are not alone." It was the only thing that kept me from drowning. My old life reached out to me in the midst of the chaos. A contingent from Willow Creek arrived, led by Alpha Kale himself. Seeing his familiar, weathered face in the glittering alien throne room was like a lifeline. He took my hands, his eyes searching mine, not with pity, but with a deep, paternal pride. "You have stepped into your destiny, Lyra," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "The pack is in awe and worried for you." Ilara came with him, her healer's satchel still over her shoulder. She hugged me fiercely, whispering, "I knew the moon had a plan. I just didn't know it was this grand." But not all attention was benevolent. At a reception for the arriving dignitaries, I felt the weight of hostile stares. A cluster of young she-wolves from powerful families, all beautifully dressed and exuding a casual, born-to-rule confidence, watched me from across the room. Their whispers were like the hiss of winter wind through barren trees. I overheard a fragment, "Ghost Wolf, a charity case for the throne." The shame I thought I'd left behind flared, hot and acidic. That night, alone with Theron for the first time in days, in our study, as he insisted it now was, the strain showed. We were reviewing the final seating chart for the bonding feast, a diabolically complex puzzle of egos and alliances, and I fell silent, the names swimming before my eyes. "Tell me," he said, setting aside his own papers.
"They're not entirely wrong, are they?" I admitted, the words spilling out in a tired rush, the ones who whisper. "I am not prepared for this. I have no training in statecraft, no instinct for these games. My only strength was tending plants that don't plot against you." He moved around the desk and knelt before my chair, forcing me to meet his eyes. The action was so shockingly unkinglike it stole my breath. "You faced down my entire council with 40 minutes warning and no preparation," he said, his voice low and fervent. "You offered your blood to ancient magic for the sake of truth. You have absorbed a century's worth of political history in 3 days without complaint. You think strength is only fangs and fury? The strength that holds kingdoms together is woven from courage, compassion, and the will to stand when everything in you screams to flee. His hands cradled my face. And you, Lyra of the Ghost Wolf, possess that strength in abundance. They whisper because they fear what they do not understand, and they do not understand a strength that does not need to roar to be real. His belief was a mantle he placed upon my shoulders, heavy but strangely strengthening. The bond between us swelled with his conviction, washing over my doubts like a cleansing tide. The day before the ceremony, a different test arrived. Lady Selene requested a private audience. She entered my solar with her usual regal poise, but without her sneering counselors. She studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to meet her unsettling violet gaze. "I have come," she said without preamble, "to give you the oath Theron demanded, but also to offer you a warning." She knelt, not with the forced submission of the sanctum, but with a deliberate, solemn grace. "I, Selene of the Western Wastes, swear my loyalty and the loyalty of my territory to you, Lyra, Queen Consort of the 5 territories. May the moon strike me barren and my line end if I break this vow." The formal words hung in the air. Then she rose. "The warning is this: you have removed a prize many had spent their lives fighting for. You have made enemies you cannot yet name. The bonding ceremony will not be your greatest trial. It will be the morning after, when you must be the queen, not just be crowned as one. They will watch for weakness, for error, for a sign that you are, as they hope, a temporary fascination." Her gaze was not kind, but it was honest. "You must give them none." It was not encouragement, it was a battlefield assessment, and in its own way it was more valuable than any compliment. "Thank you, Lady Selene," I said, my voice steady. She inclined her head, a flicker of something like respect in her eyes, and left. The final night before the ceremony, sleep was impossible. The weight of tomorrow, of forever, pressed down on me. I slipped from my bed and walked to the balcony Theron had first shown me. The city was a river of light below, beautiful and terrifying. I didn't hear him approach, but I felt him through the bond, a steady, calm presence moving closer. He came to stand beside me, also cloaked in the stillness of the deep night. "A year ago," I said, softly, not looking at him, "I was preparing to live a life of quiet loneliness. Now I am to be queen. The scale of it doesn't feel real." "What feels real?" he asked, his shoulder brushing mine. I reached out, not with my hand, but along the glowing cord that connected our spirits. I let him feel the maelstrom, the fear, the awe, the crushing responsibility, the fragile, defiant hope. "This," I whispered, "this feels real." He turned and took my hands in his. In the moonlight, his face was all stark plains and shadows, but his eyes were gentle. "This is real. It is the only thing that matters. The politics, the crown, the threats, they are the storm. This," he squeezed my hands, "is the anchor. Remember that tomorrow. When they place the circlet on your head, when they chant your titles, when you feel 1,000 eyes judging your worth, remember this anchor. We face the storm together." He raised my hand and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, a gesture of chivalry and profound promise. No kiss on the lips, no improper touch, but a seal of partnership that resonated deeper than any physical act could. We stood in silence as the moon began its descent, the first faint hints of dawn painting the eastern sky with streaks of pale gold and rose. The citadel, the city, the entire realm was about to awaken to a new day, a new era. And I, Lyra of the Ghost Wolf, would awaken as a queen. Chapter 9. The Bonding of Sun and Shadow. Dawn on the day of the bonding ceremony did not creep in. It was heralded by the deep, resonant pealing of the citadel's great moon-bronze bells. The sound washed over the mountain in waves, announcing to the city below and the world beyond that a royal union was at hand. Inside my chambers, the calm of the previous night was shattered by a whirlwind of final preparations. Lyra herself, having insisted on serving as my attendant, fussed over me with a motherly focus that steadied my nerves. The ceremonial gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and spider gossamer silver thread, woven with patterns of intertwining vines and crescent moons. It was lighter than air, yet it felt as heavy as chainmail as it was settled over my shoulders. My hair was not braided with simple heather, this time woven into an intricate crown of living silver-white orchids and tiny star-like pearls, their scent cool and elusive. "You look," she said, her voice thick with tears she refused to shed, "like a queen from the oldest tales, like the spirit of the moon herself." I barely recognized the reflection in the full-length mirror. The pale, anxious girl from Willow Creek was gone, replaced by a figure of ethereal, otherworldly grace. But the eyes were still mine, wide and full of a terror I could not disguise. Captain Isolde entered, clad not in her practical guard uniform, but in formal dress armor of polished silver, the eagle and moon crest etched over her heart. She offered me a small, firm nod of approval. "It is time, Your Majesty." The walk to the Grand Temple of the Moon was a procession through a gauntlet of awe. The entire citadel seemed to line the covered walkways and soaring galleries. Hundreds of wolves, from the highest lord to the lowliest scullery maid, bowed as I passed. The air thrummed with their silent scrutiny, their whispered blessings, their hidden resentments. I kept my eyes forward, my spine straight, clutching the anchor of the bond within me. Theron was there, a steady, burning star at the other end of the connection, already at the temple, waiting.
The temple was an open-air coliseum of white marble, built around a natural spire of living moonstone at its center. The sky above was a perfect, cloudless blue. Every tiered stone seat was filled. I saw the colors and sigils of all 5 territories, a living mosaic of the realm I was to help rule. The Council of 5 sat in a place of honor at the front, their expressions ranging from Lord Boren's solemn approval to Lady Celine's watchful neutrality. Silas stood near the altar, a slight, knowing smile on his lips. And then I saw him. Theron stood at the base of the moonstone spire, dressed in regalia of midnight blue and silver. A circlet of dark silver, shaped like intertwining thorned vines, rested on his brow. He looked every inch the legendary Alpha King, powerful, remote, untouchable. But as I began the long walk down the central aisle, his eyes found mine, and in that gaze, the king vanished. I saw only Theron. The intensity was still there, but it was softened by a wonder that mirrored my own. Through our bond, I felt a surge of emotion so potent it stole my breath. Pride, possessiveness, a fierce, protective joy, and beneath it all, a vulnerability he showed to no one else. It gave wings to my feet. The High Priestess, an ancient she-wolf with eyes like milky quartz, stood between us. The ceremony was a blend of ancient ritual and profound simplicity. We spoke vows not of obedience and submission, but of partnership and mutual strength, vows to protect the realm together, to be each other's counsel and solace, to honor the bond the moon had woven. Then came the moment of claiming, not with violence, but with sacred intent. Theron's hands were gentle as he tilted my head, exposing the line of my throat. His canines elongated, gleaming in the sunlight. There was no fear in me, only a rightness that resonated in my soul. The bite was sharp, brief, a quick puncture followed by a warm flood of connection as his essence mingled with mine. A bond mark, permanent and visible, a declaration to the world. My turn.
My own small human teeth could not pierce his tough skin, but my wolf, that gentle spirit, surged forward with a confidence she'd never possessed. A pale, silvery shimmer enveloped my hand, and I felt the subtle elongation of my own canines. I rose onto my toes, pressed my lips to the juncture of his neck and shoulder, and bit down. The taste was of winter wind and deep earth, of power and loneliness. I left my own mark, a delicate twin to his. As I pulled back, a collective gasp rippled through the temple. For a moment, as our bond marks were made, a visible manifestation had occurred. A brief, brilliant halo of intertwined silver and gold light had flashed around us, a public echo of the sanctum's magic. The proof was undeniable. The high priestess raised our joined hands. Before the sun and the moon, before the assembled territories, the bond is sealed. I present to you King Theron and Queen Lyra. Long may they reign. The roar that erupted was deafening. Long live the king! Long live the queen! It echoed off the mountains, a sound of hope, of change, of a new chapter being written in stone. The coronation followed within the hour in the throne room. The same room where I had been judged was now the site of my ascension. Kneeling before Theron on the obsidian dais, I felt the weight of the queen consort's circlet as he placed it upon my head. It was lighter than the bonding circlet, a delicate wreath of white gold set with a single teardrop moonstone that rested on my forehead. But its symbolic weight was immense. "Rise, Queen Lyra," Theron commanded, his voice echoing with ceremonial power. I rose and turned to face the realm. The empty white throne was no empty anymore. As I took my seat beside him, a profound silence fell. The duality was complete. Sun and shadow, strength and spirit, king and queen. The celebrations that night were a blur of music, light, and endless faces. I danced with territorial alphas, accepted toasts from grizzled generals, exchanged careful pleasantries with sleek diplomats. Through it all, Theron was my constant pole star, his hand on the small of my back, a whispered word of guidance, a shared pulse of amusement or caution down our bond. We were a team, performing a complex public dance. It was near dawn when we finally escaped to the royal chambers, a connected suite of rooms that were now ours. The grandeur was tempered by personal touches. My things had been moved in, my mother's journal on a bedside table, a simple vase of wildflowers from the Citadel Gardens on a desk. The silence was a blessed relief. The bond between us hummed, vibrant and alive, filled with the echoes of the day's emotions, his pride, my exhaustion, our shared incredulous triumph. He came to stand behind me as I looked out at the city, now sparkling under a rising moon. "Regrets?" he asked, softly, his hands resting on my shoulders. I leaned back into his solid warmth. "None," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. Only awe and a healthy amount of terror about what comes tomorrow. He turned me to face him. His fingers traced the edge of my bonding mark with a feather-light touch. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin the real work. The council will have their first formal session with you as queen. Petitions will arrive. Disputes will need arbitration. The business of ruling is less about ceremonies and more about ledgers, laws, and listening." A faint smile touched his lips. "But tonight we rest. We have crossed the threshold." He did not press for more. He simply held me, our foreheads touching, breathing the same air, two souls anchored together in the quiet eye of the storm we had chosen. Outside, the kingdom slept, unaware that its foundation had been quietly, irrevocably strengthened. The ghost girl and the lonely king were no more. In their place stood a queen who had found her strength and a king who had found his heart. The story of our reign had just begun. Chapter 10. The Queen's First Court. The morning after the coronation arrived not with bells, but with the sober, gray light of reality. The silks and flowers were gone, replaced by the weight of a simple, elegant garn of slate blue wool and the heavier, invisible mantle of duty. My first official day as Queen Consort began not with celebration, but with the Council of Five. They awaited me in the council chamber, a room of dark wood and maps, less intimidating than the throne room, but far more potent. This was where the real power was brokered. Fearon sat at the head of the long table, but the chair to his right, once perpetually empty, was now mine. As I entered and took my seat, the council members rose and offered bows that were correct, if not warm. Lady Celine's violet eyes were analytical. Lord Evander's smile was a razor's edge.
"We shall begin with the matter of the disputed grazing lands in the Silver Vale," Theron stated, launching into the agenda without preamble. A map was unrolled, showing a verdant valley straddling the border between the Iron Hills and the Southern Reach. For an hour, I listened. Lord Boren and Lord Evander argued, their voices rising over ancestral rights, seasonal migrations, and broken treaties. It was complex, tedious, and charged with old animosity. I said nothing, absorbing the history, the grievances, the unspoken threats. Finally, Theron turned to me. His expression was neutral, but through our bond I felt a question, a deliberate offering of the floor. "Queen Lyra, you have heard the arguments. What is your perspective?" All eyes turned to me. This was the test Lady Celine had warned me about, not of ceremony, but of judgment. I felt a flutter of panic, but then I thought of Willow Creek, of the careful balance needed to share the creek's water during a dry summer. This was the same, just on a continental scale. I leaned forward, tracing the line of the creek on the map with my finger. The maps show the creek as the border, but Lord Boren's herds need the western grasses in spring, and Lord Evander's need the eastern shelter in autumn. You are not arguing over land, but over time. I looked at both alphas. Has there ever been a rotational agreement? The herds of the hills use the valley from thaw to midsummer, then withdraw. The herds of the reach take it from midsummer to first frost. The land rests in winter. Shared use, not divided ownership. The chamber fell silent. It was a simple, pastoral solution, one born of a settlement gardener's understanding of cycles, not a politician's grasp of power. Lord Boren stroked his braided beard, thoughtful. "A seasonal treaty. It has precedent in the old ways, before we carved lines on maps." Lord Evander's cunning eyes narrowed, calculating. He could find no immediate political advantage to protest. It would require strict oversight, and compensation if one side overstays. "Then we shall draft it with those provisions," Theron said, a note of finality in his voice. His gaze on me held a spark of approval that warmed me more than any praise. The meeting moved on to tariffs on imported steel. This was my new life, not grand balls but gritty compromise. My unique perspective, my outsider's view untainted by decades of grudges, became a subtle asset. I saw solutions they, mired in tradition and rivalry, had overlooked. I asked questions they considered too basic, forcing them to re-examine long-held positions. In the afternoon, I held my first public audience in the Queen's Solar. It was for the common folk of the city, a baker whose oven was seized by a corrupt official, a woodcutter whose son was impressed into a lord's guard, a healer seeking patronage for a hospice. Their problems were small in scale, but immense in their importance. I listened, asked Silas for verification of facts, and rendered judgments. To the baker, I returned his oven and fined the official. To the woodcutter, I had his son released with back pay. To the healer, I granted a small stipend from the royal treasury. Word spread through the city like wildfire.
The new queen listened. She was just, and she cared for the small things. It was a different kind of power than Theron's imposing might. It was a power of connection, of grassroots legitimacy that no amount of royal decree could manufacture. But the challenges were not all so easily met. A delegation from the Frostfang Mountains arrived, led by the coldly handsome Lord Geralt, the one whose daughter had been a favored candidate for queen. His congratulations were icily polite. He presented a gift, a magnificent pelt of a rare white ice bear. Captain Isolde, standing guard behind me, went rigid. Silas leaned in and whispered, "The beast is legendary. Killing it signifies immense power. He's not giving a gift, he's issuing a challenge, demonstrating what true strength looks like." I looked at the glorious, deadly pelt, then at Lord Geralt's smug, expectant face. I could not accept it without insult. I could not praise it without acknowledging his unspoken boast. I smiled, a gentle, gracious smile. Such a magnificent creature, a testament to the raw power of the Frostfangs. It deserves a place of honor. I turned to Isolde. "Captain, have this pelt placed in the Hall of Remembrance, alongside the trophies of other great beasts who gave their lives in times before the Great Peace. Let it remind us of the raw strength we have tempered with unity." Lord Geralt's smile froze. I had accepted his gift, but framed it as a relic of a more savage, less civilized past, a past the king's peace had moved beyond. I had acknowledged his strength, but subtly dismissed its current relevance. He bowed, his eyes glinting with newfound wary respect. The political duel had been fought with words, and I had not lost. That evening, exhausted but exhilarated, I sat with Theron in our study. He was reviewing my judgments from the audience, a faint smile on his lips. "You granted the healer 50 silver crowns. The treasury master will have an apoplexy. It's a minor expense, but he guards the coffers like a dragon." I said simply, "The hospice will save lives, and a kingdom's true wealth is its people, not its coin." He looked at me, the candlelight softening the harsh planes of his face. "Today you were a queen, not just in title, but in deed. You solved a border dispute that has festered for 20 years with a farmer's wisdom. You turned a political challenge into a lesson on unity. You gave a city healer hope." He reached across the desk, his hand covering mine. "This is why the bond found you, Lyra, not for your bloodline or your wolf's strength, but for this heart that sees the realm not as a prize to be held, but as a garden to be tended." His words settled deep within me, watering the fragile seeds of my confidence. The ghost wolf, my gentle spirit, did not roar in triumph. She sat content, fulfilled, her purpose clear at last. She was not meant for battlefields of tooth and claw, but for the quieter, more vital wars of the soul, the wars for justice, for compassion, for peace. The path ahead was still fraught. Lord Geralt's cold eyes promised future friction. The council's acceptance was provisional. But as I sat with my mate, our wand a steady hum of shared purpose, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The Queen's first court had adjourned, and she had not merely survived, she had begun to reign. Chapter 11. The Frostfang Gambit. The tentative peace of the first few weeks shattered like thin ice under a heavy boot. Lord Geralt of the Frostfangs did not retreat to his mountains to nurse his wounded pride. Instead, he remained in the capital, a figure of elegant, simmering discontent, holding court in the mansion of the Frostfang embassy. His daughter, Lady Seraphine, a stunning wolf with hair like spun platinum and eyes the color of glacial lakes, became a constant haunting presence at every social function.
She never spoke against me directly. Her weapon was subtler, a pitying smile when I stumbled over an obscure protocol, a delicate frown when I expressed a common-born opinion, a way of turning her exquisite back that spoke volumes about what she considered my place. The political challenge of the pelt had evolved into a social siege. Whispers, carefully planted by Geralt's allies, began to circulate. They didn't attack the validity of the bond. The sanctum's light was irrefutable. Instead, they questioned my fitness. "A gentle heart is well and good for a village," I overheard a noble from the Sun Plains murmur at a poetry recital. "But can it weather the frost of true rule? The frost fangs respect strength above all. Without it, our northern border grows unstable." The word strength was always emphasized, always contrasted with my quiet ways, my spirit wolf. Theron's formidable power was seen as separate, his own. The implication was clear. The king had chosen a fragile companion, and the realm's enemies would scent that weakness. The crisis broke not in the council chamber, but in the royal kennels. A gift arrived from Lord Geralt, ostensibly for the royal kennels, a pair of Frostfang snow wolf pups. They were magnificent creatures, with fur like new snow and eyes of pale, intelligent blue. But they were not domesticated. They were barely weaned wildlings, fierce and skittish, bred for generations in the harsh mountains for their aggression and independence. The kennel master, a gentle old man named Hodge, was terrified of them. They refused to eat, snarled at any approach, and one had already bitten a stable boy who got too close. "It is another test," Silas said grimly, watching the pups huddle together in a reinforced run, their tiny bodies trembling with fear and defiance. If you reject them, you are seen as weak and ungrateful. If you accept them and they cannot be controlled, they are a dangerous, visible symbol of your inability to command respect. If they die under your care, it is a sign of your negligence. "And if I succeed?" I asked, my heart aching for the frightened animals. They were pawns in a game they couldn't understand. Silas shrugged. "Then you prove a point, but no one believes you can. These are not Willow Creek herding dogs, Lyra. Their spirits are wild ice." I spent hours at the kennel run, not trying to touch them, just sitting quietly outside the bars, speaking in soft, steady tones. I brought food, but didn't push it on them. I simply sat, letting them grow accustomed to my scent, my presence. My own wolf, that gentle spirit, stirred within me. She felt no threat from these wild pups, only their profound fear and confusion. She radiated a calm, non-threatening aura, a sense of peaceful understanding that I tried to project. Days passed. The court watched, the whispers growing louder. The queen plays nursemaid to feral beasts. Lord Geralt made a point of visiting the kennels, his expression one of theatrical concern. "A pity," he sighed loudly to his entourage. "Such magnificent bloodlines. They require a firm, dominant hand. A touch too soft, and their wild nature is ruined." Then, on the 5th day, the smaller male pup, bolder or more desperate, crept to the food bowl while I sat silently. He ate, watching me warily. The next day, the female joined him. On the 7th day, as I sat humming an old lullaby my mother used to sing, the male pup slowly, incrementally, inched his way across the run until he was sitting just on the other side of the bars from me. He didn't growl. He just watched me with those ancient blue eyes. I didn't reach for him. I just kept humming. The next morning, I entered the run, Hodge wringing his hands outside. The pups didn't flee. They watched, tense but not hostile. I sat in the straw. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the male pup, with a bravery that cracked my heart, walked over and laid his head in my lap with a soft, shuddering sigh. The bond that flared wasn't the magical mate bond, but something simpler and just as profound, the trust of a wild thing choosing to be tame. The female soon followed, curling against my side. Word exploded through the citadel. The queen had tamed the untamable Frostfang snow wolves, not with force, but with quiet patience. The symbolism was potent, undeniable. She had met strength with a different kind of strength and had prevailed. Lord Geralt's public reaction was a mask of stiff congratulations, but that night, during a state dinner, his true move was revealed. As the conversation turned to border security, he said, his voice carrying, "Of course, the docility of pets is one thing, the loyalty of warriors is another. My daughter, Seraphine, leads my finest pack of trackers. They recently captured a band of raiders from the Scarred Wastes who had slipped past the current border patrols." He gestured to Seraphine, who inclined her head with cool grace. Perhaps the Queen would benefit from observing true Frostfang efficiency firsthand. We could arrange a demonstration, a small hunt in the Royal Preserve, to see how real wolves secure a kingdom. The challenge was direct, public, and inescapable. It was no longer about pets, but about the core of my perceived weakness. He was forcing me into a test of primal, physical prowess, the only arena where I undeniably lacked. All eyes swiveled to me. Theron's hand tightened on his goblet. I could feel his rage, a volcano ready to erupt on my behalf. To refuse was to admit incapacity. To accept was to invite humiliation, or worse, danger in a controlled hunt. I set my own goblet down softly. The room was silent enough to hear the candle flames flicker. I looked at Lady Seraphine, then at her father, and smiled. It was not a gentle smile this time. It was the cool, regal smile of a queen who has just been handed an opportunity. "A demonstration is an excellent idea, Lord Geralt," I said, my voice clear and carrying. "But the Royal Preserve is for peaceful contemplation. The Scarred Wastes raiders, however, are a genuine threat. Why stage a play when we can address the real problem?" I turned to Theron. "My king, with your permission, I would propose a joint operation. Let Lady Seraphine's renowned trackers lead, and let them be joined by a contingent of the Royal Vanguard, overseen by Captain Isolde. And I paused, letting the suspense build, will accompany them not as a warrior, but as the Crown's observer, to see firsthand the coordination required to defend our borders, and to ensure that justice, not mere brutality, guides our actions." The proposal was a masterstroke. I had accepted his challenge, but transformed it. I moved the field from a symbolic hunt to a real military operation, under joint command, diluting his control. I inserted Isolde, whose loyalty was absolute, and whose tactical skill was legendary. And by going as an observer, I placed myself in the role of sovereign oversight, above the fray, while still demonstrating courage.
Lord Gerald was trapped. He could not refuse a genuine security mission he himself had brought up. His face paled with suppressed fury. "An ambitious plan, Your Majesty. The wastes are perilous. All the more reason for the Crown to witness the peril our defenders face," I replied smoothly. "We shall leave in 3 days. Captain Isolde, you will coordinate with Lady Seraphine on the details." The dinner concluded in a buzz of stunned conversation. In our chambers later, Theron pulled me into a fierce embrace. "That was brilliantly done," he murmured against my hair. "But Lyra, the Scarred Wastes are no place for you. It is a desperate, lawless border. The raiders are vicious." I leaned back to look at him. "I know, but I must go. If I hide behind these walls, the whispers will become a roar. I must show them that my strength lies not in fang and claw, but in the will to stand where a queen is needed. And," I added, touching his worried face, "I will have Isolde and your bond with me. I will be careful." He held my gaze, the storm in his eyes slowly calming to resigned pride. "Then I will double the guard, and you will take the Frostfang wolf pups with you." I blinked. "The pups? They're just babies." "They are Frostfang wolves," he said, a sly smile touching his lips. "Their presence on your mission, loyal to you, will be a constant, galling reminder to Gerald of his first defeat. And," his expression sobered, "their senses are keen. They may warn you of dangers even Isolde cannot see." The gambit was set. The queen was going to war, not with a sword, but with her wits, her courage, and 2 pups that had chosen a gentler hand. The frost fangs had sought to test my weakness. Instead, they had handed me a chance to define my strength on my own terms, at the very edge of the kingdom. Chapter 12. The Scarred Wastes. The journey to the eastern border was a descent from the citadel's alpine splendor into a landscape of grim austerity. The lush valleys gave way to rocky foothills, then to a vast cracked plain under a relentless sun, the Scarred Wastes. The air grew dry and carried the faint, acrid scent of dust and bitter herbs. It was a place that felt forgotten by the moon, a territory of desperate survival and sporadic, brutal violence. Our party was a tense fusion of two worlds. Lady Seraphine led a dozen of her frost fang trackers. They moved with a silent, lethal grace, clad in white and gray furs that made them seem like ghosts of the mountain, even here in the desert. They communicated with sharp hand signals and ignored the rest of us with practiced disdain. Captain Isolde commanded an equal number of the Royal Vanguard, their midnight blue and silver a stark contrast. They were disciplined, vigilant, their eyes constantly scanning the horizons. The two pups, whom I'd named Frost and Ember, trotted beside my horse, no longer trembling but alert and curious, their wild heritage making them unnervingly aware of the environment. I rode at the center, dressed in practical, sturdy riding leathers, a light cloak of gray wool pulled around me. I was the observer, the point of friction. Seraphine's cold glances were a constant reminder that she saw me as a burden, a political prop slowing down her mission. We made camp on a high rocky bluff as the first day ended. The wastes stretched before us, an ocean of shadows and silver in the moonlight. Isolde posted sentries. Seraphine's trackers melted into the darkness to scout. I sat by the small shielded fire, Frost and Ember curled at my feet. Seraphine approached, her movements soundless. "We have found their trail," she said, without preamble, her voice as cold as her namesake. "A day's ride northeast, a group of 20, maybe more. Well armed, they move like they know the land." "Your trackers are efficient," I acknowledged. "Efficiency is the only way to survive out here," she said, her glacial eyes assessing me. "Sentiment gets you killed. Your companions," she glanced at the pups, "will be a liability if we encounter the raiders. Their scent will carry. Their noise will betray us." "They are under my control," I said, though I had no idea if that was true. She gave a faint, dismissive snort. "We attack at dawn tomorrow. You and your royal guard will hold the rear. My trackers will flush them toward a canyon where we can eliminate the threat." Her plan was simple, brutal, and typical Frostfang. Maximum force, minimal nuance. "Eliminate?" I asked. "Our purpose is to capture and bring them to justice, to understand their motives, their roots. A dead raider tells us nothing." Seraphine's lip curled. "Justice is a luxury for citadels. Out here, there is only survival. They are a disease. You cut it out." She turned and walked back to her trackers. Isolde appeared at my shoulder, her expression grim. "She is not right about the danger, Majesty, but her tactics are extreme. If we simply slaughter them, we learn nothing, and we become no better than they are. It will also be a propaganda victory for Gerald, proof that only Frostfang ruthlessness works." I stared into the fire, the weight of the decision heavy. This was no longer about politics, it was about life and death, and the kind of queen I would be. "We need a different plan," I said quietly. "We need to capture their leader, alive." Isolde raised an eyebrow. "A direct assault to capture is far more dangerous than an ambush to kill." I looked at Frost and Ember, then out at the vast, listening darkness. An idea, fragile and dangerous, began to form. It relied on everything I was, and everything I was not. "We don't assault," whispered I. "We draw them out, divide them." I outlined my idea. It was risky. It relied on deception, on using their expectations against them.
Isolde listened, her tactical mind evaluating. A slow, reluctant smile spread across her stern face. It's unorthodox, it's mad, it might just work, but it requires you to be the bait, Your Majesty. I know, I said, my heart pounding, but the bait is not helpless. Before dawn, we put the plan into motion. Seraphine was livid when I informed her of the change, but a sharp command from Isolde, backed by the authority of the crown I carried, silenced her protest. She agreed with sullen fury, seeing it as a doomed folly. As the sun rose, painting the wastes in hues of rust and ochre, I rode out with only 2 royal vanguard guards, Isolde's most trusted, making no effort to conceal our path. We were a small, seemingly vulnerable party, a noblewoman with a light escort, lost on the edge of civilization. The rest of the vanguard and the Frostfang trackers concealed themselves along a narrow, rocky delphi we would pass through. Frost and Ember loped alongside, their senses stretched to the limit. The plan was for the raiders, always opportunistic, to see easy prey and give chase, funneling into the trap. For hours, nothing.
The tension was a wire drawn tight in my chest. Then Frost stopped, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Ember whined, pressing against my horse's leg. A moment later, I saw them, figures emerging from behind rock formations, moving with the loose, confident gait of predators. More than 20, hard-faced men and women with scavenged armor and cruel weapons. Now, I whispered to my guards. We wheeled our horses and spurred them into a gallop, not back the way we came, but toward the planned defile, a feigned panic. The raiders whooped and gave chase, their hunger for plunder overriding caution. The ground flew beneath us, arrows whistled past, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was madness, this was real. I could feel Theron's distant fear and fury through the bond, a white-hot star of anxiety in the back of my mind, but I shut it out, focusing on the path. We thundered into the narrow defile, the walls closing in. The raiders poured in after us, their numbers cramping the space. Then, from the cliffs above, Isolde's signal echoed, a sharp, piercing whistle. Chaos erupted. The royal vanguard, hidden above, rained down a volley of non-lethal blunt arrows and nets, aiming to disable, not kill. From the rear of the defile, Seraphine's Frostfang trackers let out chilling unison howls and charged, their white furs making them look like avenging spirits. Caught between the two forces, confused and hampered, the raiders' formation broke. In the melee, I saw him, their leader, a tall, scarred man with a crown of rusted iron on his brow, bellowing orders. He was trying to rally them to fight back toward Seraphine's line, the more lethal threat. This was the moment. I nudged my horse forward, my 2 guards flanking me. Frost and Ember, sensing my intent, shot ahead, not attacking but circling the leader, yapping and snarling, a dizzying, distracting blur of white fur. The leader swiped at them, his attention divided. "You are taken in the name of the crown," I shouted, my voice ringing with an authority I didn't feel. "Surrender and you will face justice." He turned, his eyes widening in shock and contempt as he saw me, a woman, unarmed, facing him down. "You," he spat, "you are the prize." He lunged for my horse's bridle. One of my guards moved to intercept, but Frost was faster. With a snarl that was shockingly deep for a pup, he launched himself and clamped his jaws onto the man's sword arm. It wasn't a debilitating bite, but it was enough. The leader roared in pain and surprise, his weapon clattering to the ground. My guard was on him in an instant, pinning him. The sight of their leader captured broke the remaining raiders' will. They threw down their weapons. The dust settled, the defile was filled with the moaning captives, the barks of orders, and the panting of the 2 proud pups now sitting calmly at my feet, their job done. We had succeeded. Captures, not massacres. Intelligence, not just corpses. Seraphine strode up, her clothes dusty, her expression unreadable. She looked at the captured leader, at the subdued raiders, at Frost and Ember sitting loyally by me, then finally at my face. For a long moment she said nothing. The contempt in her eyes was gone, replaced with something harder to define, a grudging, bewildered respect. "You divided them," she said finally, her voice less icy. "You used their greed against them. You used your apparent weakness as a weapon." She shook her head, as if clearing it. It was a good hunt. It was the closest to a compliment I would ever get from her. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the scarred wastes in a harsh, revealing light, we bound the prisoners and prepared for the return journey. I had faced the test of the wild border not with the strength of a warrior, but with the cunning of a queen. The Frostfang gambit had been met and answered, and in the dust of the wastes, a new kind of respect for the ghost wolf queen was born. Chapter 13: The Council of Shadows. The triumphant return from the scarred wastes was a turning point, but not the end of the game. It merely moved the pieces to a more complex board. Lord Geralt, faced with his daughter's tacit acknowledgement of my successful leadership and the very public capture of the raiders, was forced to retreat. He offered formal congratulations and departed for the Frostfangs, his plans thwarted, his daughter remaining as his envoy, a figure whose icy disdain had thawed into a watchful, wary neutrality. Peace, however, was illusory. As autumn gilded the mountains around Aethelgard, a subtler, more insidious threat began to coil through the citadel's marble halls. It started with small things: a trusted clerk in the treasury found to be embezzling funds, his loyalty bought by an unknown patron; a fire in the royal archives that destroyed tax records from the South Reach, records that might have proven Lord Evander was underreporting his territory's yields; a whisper among the servants that the queen's gentle ways were a mask and that she practiced moon taboo blood magic to keep the king enthralled. This was not the frontal assault of the Frostfangs. This was the work of shadows, of poison in the dark. Someone was undermining the crown's authority, not by challenging it, but by rotting its foundations from within. The target was not just Theron anymore. It was the stability of our joint rule, and increasingly the whispers sought to tarnish my newfound credibility. Silas Thorne became a specter, moving through the citadel's underbelly. His reports grew grimmer. The money trail from the clerk leads to a shell trading company, which leads to a holding group in the Sun Plains, which vanishes into thin air, he said one evening in the study, his face etched with fatigue. The fire was no accident. An alchemical compound was used that leaves no common trace. And the whispers, they are too coordinated, too specific in their lies to be mere gossip. This is a campaign. "A shadow council," Silas murmured, his amber eyes gleaming. "Not the official one, a cabal of interests working in the dark, using the structures of the 5 territories as both shield and weapon. Their goal isn't necessarily to overthrow you, Theron. It might be to cripple your rule, to make the central authority so bogged down in suspicion and internal strife that the territories can revert to their old autonomous ways, or worse, elevate one of their own as a new power." The concept was chilling, an enemy with no face, hidden among the courtiers and lords we saw every day. Their weapon was not steel, but doubt, corruption, and chaos.
My own role shifted again. I could not hunt shadows with a sword, so I hunted them with light. I instituted weekly public forums in the Citadel's great courtyard, where any citizen could bring grievances directly to the Queen. I made the Crown's justice visible and accessible, countering the narrative of a distant, corrupt court. I personally oversaw the rebuilding of the archives, inviting scholars from all territories to contribute copies of their records, creating a new, decentralized system of accountability that was harder to sabotage. And I used my bond. In council meetings, as Lady Selene debated trade or Lord Boren argued for garrison funds, I quieted my mind and reached for the emotional undertones flowing from the bond from Theron. I felt his sharp spike of suspicion when Evander made a particularly smooth argument. I felt his grudging respect for Boren's blunt honesty. It wasn't mind-reading, but an empathic gauge of truth and intent that proved uncannily accurate. One afternoon, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lyra, who had stayed on as my personal healer, was tending to a kitchen maid who had fallen ill after tasting a soup intended for my table. The sickness was strange, dizziness, blurred vision, but not lethal. Lyra, with her deep knowledge of herbs, identified the cause. Dream shade, a rare debilitating moss that grew only in the perpetually shaded sacred groves of the Mistwood. The Mistwood. Lady Isolde's territory, the ethereal, silent counselor who had never voiced anything but serene support. It could be a plant, Silas said immediately, to frame the most peaceful territory and sow more discord. Or, I said, a cold certainty settling in my gut, it is a message. The Shadow Council is showing us they can reach anywhere, even into the sacred groves of the most reclusive territory. They are demonstrating their reach, and perhaps recruiting or coercing from within. And I used my bond. In council meetings, as Lady Selene debated trade or Lord Boren argued for garrison funds, I quieted my mind and reached for the emotional undertones flowing from the bond from Theron. I felt his sharp spike of suspicion when Evander made a particularly smooth argument. I felt his grudging respect for Boren's blunt honesty. It wasn't mind-reading, but an empathic gauge of truth and intent that proved uncannily accurate. Georgie took Minnie's the leather limes. We decided on a risk. I would travel to the Mistwood, ostensibly on a royal tour to thank Lady Isolde for her loyalty, and to consult on the preservation of ancient groves. In reality, I would be walking into the potential lion's den, a visible target to draw out the shadows. Theron argued against it violently. The bond thrummed with his fear, a dark, roiling storm. You will be isolated, surrounded by her people. If she is involved... If she is not involved, we will never know from here, I countered, placing my hand over his heart, feeling its frantic beat. I must go, Theron. The Shadow War is fought in the spaces between. That is my battlefield. He relented, but only after tripling my guard and making me swear to keep the bond wide open at all times. If I feel even a flicker of true danger, I will bring the entire royal army down on the Mistwood, he vowed, his eyes deadly serious. The journey to the Mistwood was like passing into a different world. The air grew cool and damp, the light filtering through a perpetual canopy of ancient, massive trees in 1,000 shades of green. Silence reigned, but it was a living silence, filled with the drip of water and the rustle of unseen life. The Mistwood wolves were like their home, quiet, watchful, moving through the trees like memories. Lady Isolde greeted me at the edge of her great tree city, a settlement built into the living trees themselves. She was as serene as ever, her greetings flawless, but through my bond with Theron, amplified by the profound, magical quiet of the forest, I felt a new, startling clarity, and from Lady Isolde I sensed not guilt, but a deep humming anxiety and a sorrow as old as the trees. That night, in a chamber grown from woven living branches, she came to me. The moonlight here was a filtered silver ghost. You are here about the dream shade, she stated softly, no pretense in her voice. I am. She sighed, a sound like wind through leaves. The sacred grove was violated, not by my people, by outsiders who knew the hidden paths. They took cuttings of the moss and left a token. She reached into her robe and placed a small object on the table between us. It was a counselor's sigil, a personal seal of office. It was Lord Evander's. My heart sank. It was too obvious, a clumsy frame. It is meant to point to the southern reach, to make you an enemy of Lord Evander, and by extension, the crown, she whispered. But the violation, it has awakened an old anger in the woods, in me. The Mistwood has always been neutral. We do not play these games, but now the game has come to us. Her pale eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw a flicker of steel in their depths. I do not know who leads these shadows, but I know they used a path that has been forgotten for generations. A path only recorded in one place, the royal archives in Athelgard, in the very section that burned. The pieces snapped together with an almost audible click. The fire wasn't just to hide tax records, it was to destroy maps, old treaties, forgotten paths, knowledge that could be used or concealed. The Shadow Council didn't just want chaos, they were curating chaos, removing specific knowledge from the world. You have an ally in the Mistwood, Queen Lyra, Lady Isolde said, her voice firm. Not just in me, but in the forest itself. The trees have eyes. The shadows have roots here, but they are shallow. We will help you find them. I left the Mistwood with no definitive enemy, but with something more valuable, a powerful, unexpected ally, and the key to the Shadow Council's method. They weren't just attacking, they were erasing. They were trying to control the narrative of history itself, to reshape the future. And in the deep, silent anger of the ancient woods, I had found a weapon they hadn't anticipated, the enduring memory of the land.
Then we must give them a different target, I said, the idea forming as I spoke. We must make the memory they are trying to erase speak. My plan was audacious. We would use the upcoming Harvest Festival, a time when all territories sent representatives to the Citadel with offerings, to stage a counterplay. Instead of a display of military might or wealth, the centerpiece of the festival would be a ceremony of remembrance. We would publicly launch the effort to rebuild the archives, inviting historians, storytellers, and elders from every territory to come forth and share their versions of history, their maps, their songs. We would turn the Citadel into a living library, celebrating the very diversity of memory the shadows sought to homogenize and destroy. It was a gamble. It would look soft, foolishly academic to some, but it would also be a direct challenge to our hidden enemies. It would force them into the light to try and stop it, or reveal their hand by which memories they tried to suppress. The Harvest Festival arrived, the Citadel overflowing with color and noise. Great tents were erected in the courtyards for storytellers. Scribes sat ready with ink and parchment. In the Grand Plaza, a massive blank tapestry of unity was hung, waiting for weavers from each territory to add their thread. The ceremony began at dusk. I stood before the assembled thousands, not in warrior's garb or glittering silks, but in a simple dress the color of parchment, embroidered with the sigils of all 5 territories. A kingdom is not just its land and its laws, I called out, my voice carried by amplifiers of polished horn. It is the memory of its people. The stories of our past tell us who we are. Today we begin to weave those stories back together, stronger than before. One by one, representatives came forward, an ancient crone from the Iron Hills sang a ballad of the first mine. A Mistwood druid chanted the names of the sacred groves. A Sun Plains rider drew a map in the sand of ancient migration routes. The atmosphere shifted from festival revelry to one of profound collective reverence. Then a stooped old man from the southern reach shuffled forward. He was a keeper of tax records, one of the few who had kept private copies. As he began to read from a ledger, his voice trembling, he cited yields from Lord Evander's lands that were significantly higher than what would been reported to the crown. A murmur ran through the crowd. Lord Evander, watching from the dignitary's platform, went pale. This was the unintended spark, the public exposure of his deceit. But before the murmur could turn into an uproar, a sharp crack echoed through the plaza. The old man cried out, clutching his arm. A crossbow bolt had grazed him, fired from the crowded rooftop of a nearby guild hall. Chaos erupted. Captain Isold's guards moved like lightning, surrounding me and Theron. Silas vanished into the crowd, a hawk after its prey. In the confusion, I saw him, a figure cloaked in gray, melting back from the rooftop edge. The assassination attempt on the old historian was a desperate, revealing move. The shadows had been forced to act publicly to silence a truth, and they had failed. That night, in the secure command room, Silas delivered his report, a cut on his cheek still weeping. He was good, almost got away, but he dropped this. He placed a token on the table, not a council sigil this time, a simple polished stone of a peculiar iridescent black, veined with red. Blood ore, Silas identified. It only comes from one place, a played-out secret mine deep in the western reaches of the Frostfang Mountains. A mine not owned by the Frostfang clan, but by a private consortium. A consortium involving who? Theron demanded. Silas's smile was grim. The trail is complex, but the initial investors included a holding company linked to Lord Evander and a silent partner whose funds were funneled through a Sun Plains agricultural guild. Lord Kieran, the proud, easily offended alpha of the Sun Plains. The Shadow Council had faces now, not the entire Council of Five, but a cabal within it. Evander, seeking greater wealth and autonomy for the mercantile South, and Kieran, whose pride had been stung one too many times by perceived slights from the crown. They were using Frostfang resources, likely without Geralt's full knowledge, exploiting his ambition and sowing discord everywhere else. They hadn't wanted to overthrow the king. They wanted to make the central authority so bankrupt, so distrusted, and so bogged down that the territories would effectively secede, leaving Evander and Kieran as the dominant powers in a new fragmented realm. We had them, not with armies, but with memory and a single polished stone. The old historian's truth had been the bait, and they had bitten, revealing their source, their fear, and their alliance. Theron's face was a mask of cold fury. We move at dawn. Isold, you will take the vanguard and secure the Frostfang mine, gather evidence. Silas, you will coordinate with Borin and Selene. They must be told, carefully. We need to split their alliance. He turned to me, his eyes blazing. And you, my queen, will remain here, safe. I shook my head. No, the final move isn't military, it's political. They tried to silence a story, so we will tell a bigger one. I will go to the Sun Plains, not with an army, but with an offer and a warning. He stared at me, the bond flooding with his protective fear. Lyra, Kieran is proud. If he feels cornered, I said softly, he is already cornered. He aligned with a snake like Evander. He must be shown a way out that saves his pride and his territory. If we attack, we make him a martyr. If I go, I can offer him a chance to be the hero who exposes the corruption, to save his people from the war Evander's greed would bring. It was the riskiest move yet, to walk into the territory of a betrayed ally, armed only with words and truth. But it was the only move that could end this without plunging the kingdom into civil war. The Shadow War had been fought with whispers and erased memories. It would end with a story told in the sunlight of the plains, a story of redemption or ruin. The fate of the kingdom now hinged not on a battle, but on a conversation. Chapter 15. The Sunlight on the Plains. The journey to the Sun Plains was a passage from the citadel's stone shadow into a realm of boundless, glaring light. The sky was a vast, polished dome of blue, stretching over endless seas of golden, wind-rippled grass. It was a land of open horizons, and, as I was about to test, equally open pride. I rode not at the head of an army, but with a modest escort led by Captain Isolde, her expression grimmer than the Frostfang peaks.
At my side, in a small, velvet-lined box, rested the iridescent blood-ore stone and the damning financial records Silas had painstakingly reconstructed. My weapons were not steel, but evidence and empathy. Lord Kieran's stronghold was not a fortress, but a sprawling, low complex of pale stone and sun-bleached timber, built around a natural oasis. It spoke of a lord confident in the strength of his land and his people. As we approached, riders emerged from the grass, surrounding us. They were not overtly hostile, but their postures were stiff, their hands resting near their weapons. The news of Evander's exposure and the raid on the Frostfang mine had clearly raced ahead of us. We were escorted into a great hall open on one side to the plains, the wind carrying the scent of dry earth and sun-warmed stone. Lord Kieran awaited us on a simple chair of carved cedar. He was a man in his prime, with sun-weathered skin and hair the color of ripe wheat, but his eyes, the same gold as his lands, held a storm of betrayed fury and deep apprehension. He did not rise. "Lord Lyra," he said, his voice a low, rough scrape, "you bring the crown's justice to my door. Do you come to arrest me, or to watch my territory burn?" I motioned for Isolde and the guards to stay at the entrance. I walked forward alone, the box in my hands. "I come with neither, Lord Kieran. I come with a choice." I set the box on a low table between us and opened it. The blood-ore stone glinted, malevolent and beautiful. This came from a secret mine in the Frostfangs, funded by a consortium involving Lord Evander and you. I didn't accuse, I stated. I placed the parchment beside it. The shadows that have been poisoning the realm had two heads, one of greed, one of pride. Evander's greed for wealth and autonomy, and your pride, wounded by years of feeling your territory's contributions were overlooked, its voice unheard at the crown's table. His jaw worked, but he did not deny it. The truth was a weight he had been carrying alone. "Evander said we were reclaiming our birthright," he said, the words torn from him, "that the strong territories propped up the weak, that under a new order the Sun Plains would shine as it deserved. And instead," I said softly, "you funded lies, arson, and attempted murder. You allied with a man who would sell the realm's memory for a profit. Is this the shine you wanted, Lord Kieran? The gleam of blood ore and treason?" He flinched as if struck. The proud lord was crumbling, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. "What choice do I have now? You have the evidence. Theron will strip my lands, execute me, install a puppet." "That is one path," I acknowledged, meeting his tormented gaze. "The path of vengeance. It would leave the Sun Plains leaderless and bitter, a wound in the realm that would fester for generations. It would prove every whisper Evander fed you, that the crown is a tyrant." I took a step closer, my voice dropping, meant for him alone. "But there is another choice. You can help us sever the second head of the snake. Evander is isolated now. The mine is seized. The Frostfangs, once his potential allies, have been shown his deceit. The Mistwood stands with the crown. Lord Boren's honor would never side with a traitor. Lady Selene only backs winners." I pushed the box slightly toward him. "You can be the one who brings the full truth to light. You can stand before the Council of Five and testify, not as a condemned prisoner, but as the Alpha of the Sun Plains who discovered a viper in his midst and had the courage to crush it.
Your territory's contributions will be recorded, celebrated, enshrined in the new archives. Your voice will not just be heard, it will be instrumental in saving the realm.
I was offering him a story, a new narrative to replace the one of betrayal, a chance to transform his shame into honor, his ruin into redemption. It was a gamble that his pride, his deep love for his land, was stronger than his fear. The silence in the hall was immense, filled only by the sighing of the plain's wind. I could feel Pharaon's distant, anxious presence through the bond, a steady pressure of support. I could see Isolde's hand on her sword hilt, ready, but this battle was mine alone. Lord Kieran stared at the blood ore, his face a landscape of conflict. He saw the end of his line, the disgrace of his people. Then slowly he looked up at me, at the queen who had come not with fire and sword, but with a lifeline woven from understanding and a desperate hope for peace. A single, stark tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. He did not wipe it away. Evander has a fortified manor in the southern hills, he said, his voice hollow but clear. He will have fled there. He keeps his most damning records in a vault beneath the study, behind a tapestry of the silver veil. He took a deep, shuddering breath, as if breathing for the first time in years. I will give you the plans, and I will stand before the council and the sun and tell them what I have done and what I will do to make it right. The tension shattered, not with violence, but with a profound, exhausted release. I had not conquered the Sun Plains. I had saved them, and in doing so, I had saved the realm from civil war. The unraveling of the Shadow Council was swift and decisive. With Lord Kieran's testimony and the evidence from the manor vault, Lord Evander's network collapsed. He was captured trying to flee to the scarred wastes. His trial was public, his crimes laid bare for all territories to see. The sentence was permanent exile to a remote, barren island, his lands and titles forfeited to the crown, a punishment more crushing to a man of his avarice than death. In the aftermath, the Council of Five was reconstituted. Lord Kieran, his honor paradoxically restored by his confession, retained his seat, but with a new, humbled gravitas. Lady Selene, ever pragmatic, became a staunch supporter of the strengthened crown. Lord Boren's trust in Pharaon was absolute. Lady Isolde of the Mistwood brought the ancient wisdom of the forests to the table. The empty seat of the Southern Reach was filled by a younger, reform-minded alpha chosen by the people there, ending Evander's dynastic grip. The true victory, however, was not in the council chamber, but in the spirit of the realm. The ceremony of remembrance became an annual festival. The tapestry of unity grew vast and magnificent, a living symbol of our intertwined histories. The archives rose again, stronger, more resilient, a testament to the truth that memory is the foundation of freedom. On the first anniversary of my bonding and coronation, Theron and I stood again on the high balcony, the city of Aethelgard a river of light below us, the plains a dark, peaceful sea beyond. The air was cool, scented with night-blooming jasmine and the promise of tomorrow. "A year ago," I said, softly, leaning into his side, "I was a ghost, waiting for a life that never came. Now, look at what we've built, the peace, the unity." "What you built," he corrected, his arm tightening around me. His voice was full of a quiet awe. "The strength you brought was the missing piece, not the strength of armies, but of conviction, of a heart that sees a kingdom not as a prize, but as a family. You faced down wolves of frost and wolves of shadow, not with their own weapons, but with a gentler, sharper truth. You healed wounds I didn't even know how to touch." He turned me to face him, his ice-blue eyes soft in the starlight. "The moon did not forget you, Lyra. She was waiting. She knew the realm didn't need another warrior king. It needed a healer queen, a spirit to mend its broken memories, and a heart to unite its fractured pride. She sent me my balance, my partner, my love." The words, so freely given, filled the last hollow spaces within me. The ghost wolf was gone forever. In her place stood a queen, her spirit radiant and whole, forever entwined with the king who had found his heart in her quiet courage. Below, the kingdom slept, secure in the hard-won peace. Above, the moon shone down, her work complete. The story of the ghost girl and the lonely king ended. In its place began the eternal legend of the bonded sovereigns, the king of stone and the queen of starlight, who together turned silence into song, shadow into light, and ruled not with fear, but with a love as deep and enduring as the roots of the mountains, and as vast as the sunlit plains. Together, forever, they reigned.